Hey guys, tonight we're diving deep into a life that most people think they want but definitely wouldn't survive. Yep, being a cowboy in the Wild West. Movies made it look cool, dusty boots, dramatic sunsets, and sharp-shooting heroes riding off into the horizon. But let's be real, if you woke up as a real cowboy in the 1870s, you'd be sunburned, starving, and probably already dying of something with a 3-syllable name. You probably won't survive this, but that's okay. We'll at least make the journey entertaining. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing all your different cities and bedtimes. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes to a pale orange haze creeping over the horizon. Morning on the open range. Sounds dreamy, right? Wrong. You're immediately gagging on dust because your blanket, your shirt, and even your nose are coated in a fine powdery layer of Texas itself. Every breath tastes like powdered rock. You slept on the ground, no mattress, no pillow, just whatever patch of dirt wasn't already occupied by cow pies or fire ants. You've got a crick in your neck, a pebble embedded somewhere in your back, and the faint memory of snoring next to a guy named Two-Tooth Travis who may or may not have sleep-mumbled an entire fight with his ex-wife. There's no alarm clock out here, just the shrill whistle of the trail boss, who somehow already seems angry. He's been up since before dawn, probably chewing tobacco and wondering why the rest of you haven't finished saddling your horses in your dreams. You groggily sit up, push the dust out of your eyes, and slap your boots against a rock to knock the spiders out. You don't check for scorpions. You forgot yesterday. You screamed like a child. The shame lingers. A small fire flickers near the chuck wagon where Cookie, the camp cook, grumbles something unintelligible. He's boiling coffee so thick it qualifies as a solid. Your breakfast? Cold beans if you're late. Slightly warmer beans if you're early. Either way, it's beans. The can probably still has a little rust, but no one cares. If it's moving, you flick it off. If it's crunchy, you pretend it's seasoning. You squat by the fire with your tin cup staring into your breakfast like it might reveal a better life. It doesn't, just more beans. The sun isn't even fully up yet, and already your shirt is sticking to you in weird places. You wore it yesterday, and the day before that, and probably last month too. No one's counting. It's wool, coarse and thick, which is great for warmth in the winter and perfect for slow cooking your body like a human brisket the rest of the year. Hygiene? Optional. You smell like the opposite of soap. The scent is some horrific blend of sweat, dust, horse and despair. Every cowboy does. At some point you stop noticing. As you eat, your eyes wander to the herd. 2,000 longhorns stretching into the distance, lazily chewing cud and silently plotting to ruin your day. You're a drover, which means your job is to follow this mass of stubborn, terrified beef across hundreds of miles of prairie, through rivers, canyons, and possibly hostile territory. You ride all day, scream yourself hoarse, and try not to get crushed when one of them panics because it heard a leaf fall wrong. You stand up and stretch, bones popping like old floorboards, and head for your horse. His name is Stupid, not because he is, but because you yelled it enough times that he now answers to it. You sling your saddle on his back, a process involving curses, angry grunts, and the vague hope that today he won't try to bite your hand off when you cinch the strap too tight. He tries anyway. Classic Stupid. A strange part of you is sort of used to this already. Maybe it's the rhythm. Maybe it's the fact that you're 50 miles from the nearest town and quitting isn't an option. Or maybe it's because, deep down, there's a weird peace in knowing exactly what your day will hold. Sunburn, sore muscles, and the continuous low-level threat of being trampled to death. Historically, cowboys like you didn't even call themselves that. Drover, cowhand, or stockman were more accurate terms depending on the region. The term cowboy actually had negative connotations early on, sometimes associated with bandits or outlaws in the late 18th century before Western dime novels gave it that rugged, noble glow. So congratulations, you're living the PR version of a gig that was mostly dirty, thankless belly labour with just enough danger to keep you paranoid. What's quirky though is how diverse the cowboy crew might be. You'd expect it to be all grizzled white dudes in chaps and spurs, but actually 1 in 4 cowboys was black, and a large number were Mexican vaqueros, the original cowhands who taught American drovers most of what they knew. There were even Native American cowboys, freed slaves, and Chinese Americans working on or near cattle drives. The Wild West was multicultural, just never clean. But not everything historians say about cowboys is agreed upon. There's still a lot of debate about what life was really like on the trail. Some argue it was all relentless toil and boredom, while others claim cowboys had a sense of camaraderie, adventure, and even artistic flair. Some kept journals or sketched landscapes. Others wrote poetry, sang songs, or played harmonica at night. So were they tortured labourers or poetic nomads? Probably a bit of both, until the beans hit again. As the sun climbs higher and the cattle start to stir, you wipe your mouth on your sleeve, spit something gritty onto the ground, was it a coffee bean or a beetle, and swing yourself onto Stupid's back. The day is just beginning. Your rear already hurts, your lips are cracking, and you've got 15 hours of yelling at animals ahead of you. No one said the cowboy life was glamorous, but don't worry, it gets worse. Breakfast may have been over in a blink, but that taste of cold beans and gritty coffee lingers as you ride out with the others. The sun's barely up, casting long shadows across the endless prairie. Your legs already ache from yesterday. Your arms feel like sandbags, and your stomach makes a noise suspiciously like it's negotiating with a demon. Welcome to cowboy life, where every day starts with regret, and the only thing you can look forward to is maybe not dying that night. You ride flank today, which sounds cooler than it is. Your job is to ride along the sides of the herd, yelling and waving your arms at cows who definitely do not care. If you're lucky, you'll spend the whole day eating dust, yelling your throat raw, and only almost getting kicked in the face by one or two rogue longhorns. If you're unlucky, a steer bolts and triggers a stampede that forces you to outrun hundreds of animals in an impromptu death marathon. The real horror, though, is realising what you have for lunch. Spoiler, it's beans again. Maybe some salt pork if Cookie was feeling generous this morning, but by noon it's congealed into something that resembles a lard brick wrapped in sadness. You pull your horse to a stop, dig the tin plate out of your saddlebag, and try to chew without your molars sending pain signals directly to your brainstem. It's not so much a meal as it is a ritual of suffering. You wash it down with a sip of canteen water that tastes like warm pennies, then burp quietly and consider whether anything in the West isn't actively trying to kill you. As the afternoon stretches on, the sun climbs into full murder mode. Your shirt, damp with sweat, now sticks to your skin like soggy cardboard. There's no shade, no clouds, just an unending stretch of sky and cattle. You'd kill for a tree, even a short one, even a bush might earn your tears. You squint into the horizon, praying for anything to break the monotony. But it's just more dirt, more cows, and the glint of a vulture that looks like it's already circling for your soul. You glance over at Jesse, riding drag in the back, a punishment post where the dust is so thick it coats your teeth. Jesse's bandana, once red, is now a murky grey-brown, and his eyes are half-lidded behind goggles he made out of wire and glass. He's probably not blinking anymore, just saving energy. You briefly wonder if Jesse's still breathing or just died with his eyes open. Hard to tell out here. Now let's get personal about the fashion. Cowboy attire is often romanticised. Wide-brimmed hats, bandanas, rugged leather boots. Sounds stylish, right? Nope. You're baking in a thick wool shirt that's both itchy and strangely damp no matter the weather. Your pants are heavy denim, tough enough to survive being dragged, but stiff enough to chafe like sandpaper on your thighs. And chaps, they're leather leg protectors that make walking awkward and sitting worse. Sure, they keep cactus spines and rattlesnake fangs from eating your legs, but they also turn your inner thighs into a sweaty slip and slide. And your boots, they're not comfortable. They're stiff, blistered-inducing instruments of torture with zero arch support. Every step you take when you're not in the saddle is a gamble with God. Historically speaking, most cowboys didn't even own the full look, those wide-brimmed hats we all associate with them. Many wore derbies or bowler hats early on, whatever was cheap or second-hand. And as for spurs and silver buckles, most drovers were lucky if their belt held up their pants. The real uniform was practicality, protection from the elements and whatever nature hurled at you that day. Hollywood dressed cowboys better than they ever dressed themselves. As for that quirky little bit of truth, some cowboys were so poor they went barefoot. Imagine walking through snake-infested grasslands or scalding desert rock without boots. Just you, some leather chaps, and your slowly dissolving dignity. And in parts of the Southwest, especially among Mexican vaqueros and some Native American tribes, riding barefoot was not uncommon, especially for training or short runs. You may feel tough, but the soles of your feet would disagree. Now, scholars do argue over how standard cowboy attire really was. Some claim it was purely functional with very little flair. Others argue that style was part of a cowboy's identity, especially when returning to town or appearing in contests like rodeos. There's evidence of handmade embellishments, embroidered shirts, and even custom-clad saddles, all signs that vanity wasn't totally dead on the trail. But out here now, on day 11 of cattle duty, vanity is something you left in the dirt somewhere around mile 50. You keep riding, shifting constantly to avoid saddle sores. They are not just a myth. When you're in the saddle for up to 16 hours a day, the inside of your thighs start to feel like overcooked meat. The blisters come fast and they don't heal quickly, especially when you're sweating into them all day. No ointments, no band-aids, just you, your saddle, and the sound of your groaning body as you try to sit down without whimpering. Even worse, your horse is cranky today. Stupid seems determined to veer slightly to the left, no matter how much you nudge his reins. He snorts, kicks at imaginary threats, and stops to chew at some dried grass that you're pretty sure is just tumbleweed. You pat his neck, whispering what might be encouragement or mild threats. In response, he farts so loudly it startles a nearby cow. Classic. By the time the sun begins to dip, you've ridden close to 20 miles without realizing it. The cattle are settling again, chewing slowly in the fading heat. You dismount, carefully, your legs wobbling like soggy breadsticks. You limp toward camp, praying that Cookie made something other than beans for dinner, knowing full well he didn't. You'll eat, try not to gag, and then collapse by the fire while swatting mosquitoes the size of nickels off your arms. You may have survived another day, but the night holds its own challenges. Lightning, stampedes, and the possibility of rolling over onto a cactus in your sleep. And you'll do it all again tomorrow. Because being a cowboy isn't about the glory, it's about enduring everything that sucks and showing up anyway. The sun slips below the horizon, like it's trying to escape the misery before you do. And you can't blame it. Twilight out here on the trail should be peaceful. There's a kind of beauty in the vast, open silence of the plains. But instead of enjoying the view, you're too busy scratching your chest through a shirt that feels like it's made of angry bees and burlap. You want to scream. You want to strip down and roll in a creek. You want to travel back in time and tell your younger self not to dream of cowboy life unless he enjoys being roasted alive inside an unwashed wool oven. Let's talk about that shirt. You've worn it every single day for weeks. There are stains on it that you don't remember making. Some of them might be food, some of them might be blood, and one spot might actually be tree sap that's just become part of the fabric now. The collar's stiff with sweat salt, the sleeves are fraying, and the armpits smell like a goat's funeral. You tried washing it in a creek once. Big mistake. It dried stiff as armour and rubbed your skin raw for 2 days. Underneath your undershirt, or what's left of it, is clinging to your body like a moist regret. You think about just ripping it off, but then you'd be one sunburn away from becoming beef jerky with legs. So you do what cowboys do best. Does endure, and maybe scratch a lot, which only helps until it doesn't. And then you're just bleeding from mosquito bites and heat rashes that are now probably sentient. Cowboy fashion wasn't about style, it was survival. Every piece of clothing you wore was designed to protect you from something: wind, brush, sunburn, or angry livestock. That itchy wool, it stayed warm when wet. The long sleeves, they kept your arms from baking in the sun and also protected you when you fell off your horse into a mesquite bush, which happens more than you'd like to admit. But still, could someone not have invented cotton by now, or the deodorant? Your bandana tied around your neck is the only real Swiss Army knife of your outfit. It's a dust mask, a sweat rag, a pot holder, a sling if you mess up your arm, and occasionally a napkin if you're feeling fancy, but at this point it smells like old beef and regret. If this piece of fabric could talk, it would scream. And don't even get started on the socks. You've got one pair. One. The left one has a hole big enough to qualify as a window, and the right one is stiffer than rawhide. You haven't taken them off in 3 days because you're genuinely afraid of what's underneath. The last time someone on the crew tried airing their feet out, a passing coyote gagged. Socks are not friends out here. They are sard, woven prisons for your slowly decomposing toes. Historically, cowboys made do with whatever they could scavenge, barter, or repair themselves. Stores were few and far between, and supply wagons didn't exactly swing by with fresh laundry. So you patched things up with bits of rope, animal sinew, or other people's cast-offs. If you were lucky, you might find a travelling merchant selling shirts and boots, but they were expensive and usually terrible quality. So the shirt you hate? That's your shirt forever now. It's a toxic relationship, but neither of you has options. What's quirky is that despite the lack of hygiene and the grime, some cowboys actually developed signature styles. No kidding, some carved their initials into belt buckles, embroidered symbols onto shirts, or dyed their bandanas bright colours to stand out. In some towns, cowboys competed in best-dressed parades on their payday weekends. Of course, out here you could wear a rhinestone vest and no one would notice unless it blocked the flies from landing on their lunch. Scholars argue about whether cowboy clothing was more uniform or more personalised. One camp says the terrain and job demands forced everyone into the same sweaty wool prison. Another claims cowboys, especially those with a flair for performance or who worked in more populated territories, expressed themselves through their outfits. Vaqueros, for instance, had ornate gear and colourful attire that influenced cowboy fashion heavily, but their clothing served practical purposes too. So were you a walking toolbox or a dusty runway model? Somewhere in between, but leaning heavily toward toolbox with a strong odour. After another round of relentless scratching, you shuffle over to your bedroll and drop down with the kind of thud only someone with nothing left to give can achieve. The ground's no softer tonight than it was yesterday. You think about folding your saddle blanket into a pillow, then remember that it's soaked with horse sweat and probably has fleas. So you ball up your coat instead and lay your head on it, one ear still listening for the telltale low grumble of stampeding hooves. Or worse, Cookie yelling at someone for knocking over the coffee pot. You stare at the stars. There's a million of them. That part is still amazing even if your back is screaming and your skin feels like it's trying to peel itself off. You wonder what it would be like to lie under the stars without the itching, the stink, and the overwhelming knowledge that you'll wake up with a grasshopper in your ear. Maybe one day, not today. Your neighbour, Walt, starts snoring. It's not a normal snore. It's the gurgling wheeze of a man who once swallowed a harmonica and didn't fully recover. You try to block it out by covering your ears with your hat, but that only makes your head hotter. You lie there, quietly suffering, listening to the gentle symphony of prairie bugs, distant cow moos, and a man who sounds like he's being slowly eaten by a bear in his dreams. Still, you've made it another day. You didn't fall off your horse, you didn't get kicked, you didn't get trampled or stung or bitten. You did, however, chafe so badly that your inner thighs might be permanently fused to your pants. Small victories. You'll take what you can get. Tomorrow it starts all over again. And just like your shirt, you won't be any cleaner, but you'll be slightly more dead inside. But hey, that's cowboy life. You wake up face first in the dirt. Again, it's not even really morning yet. Just that dreadful hour when the sky starts turning grey, and everything thing feels cold, damp, and unnecessarily cruel. Your blanket's twisted around your legs like a noose, and you're 60% sure something crawled into your shirt during the night. You slap at your chest and groan, already dreading the moment you have to stand up. Your body feels like a sack of rocks someone dropped off a cliff, and your lower half has completely betrayed you. Every muscle from the waist down is locked in protest, and your backside, well, it feels like you've been riding bareback on a cactus for a month. The others around to the camp are already stirring. Someone farts loudly under a blanket. Someone else coughs up what sounds like a piece of lung. A few feet away, you hear Cookie yelling into his cast iron pot like it owes him money. Time to start the day. Again. Against all common sense and natural instinct, you sit up, dust clinging to your face like a second skin. Your mouth is dry, your lips are cracked, and there's dirt in your ears, your hair, and probably in your soul. Stupid, your horse is staring at you with the same level of enthusiasm you have for the morning. His ears are back, his eyes are half-lidded. He's chewing something and you have no idea what. Could be grass, could be the rag you use to clean your saddle. You make a note to check later, then immediately forget. He's tethered lazily to a mesquite bush that looks like it's considering quitting the bush life entirely. You limp over, groaning with every step, and begin the daily rodeo of getting that saddle on his back. The leather creaks. Your knees creak louder. He shifts his weight and nearly knocks you over before you get the cinch tight. Then comes the big moment, swinging your leg over the saddle without ripping anything essential. You manage, but only just. The saddle horn jabs into your ribs. The leather's stiff and unforgiving, and no matter how you shift your weight, there's no such thing as comfort. You sigh and begin moving toward the herd with the rest of the crew, knowing the next 10 to 16 hours will be a brutal test of endurance. Because riding a horse seems like it should be easier than walking, right? That's adorable. In reality, It's a full-body, all-day workout that leaves you sore in places you didn't know existed. Your knees ache from gripping the sides. Your hips feel like someone stuffed them with rusty hinges. And your tailbone? It's officially gone rogue. Each step the horse takes is another jolt straight up your spine, rattling your teeth and shaking something loose in your brain. Even worse, you've got a blister the size of a silver dollar forming in a particularly sensitive area that's making every bounce feel like torture. You shift to one side, no relief. You try standing in the stirrups, not sustainable. You consider just flinging yourself off and walking, but that's not really an option unless you enjoy being trampled by 2,000 tons of beef. The truth is, saddles were never made for comfort. They were made for endurance. The average cowboy saddle weighed between 25 and 40 pounds, and was designed to keep you balanced and locked in during sudden movements or rough terrain. The fancier ones had high cantles and saddle horns meant for roping, not for sitting pretty. And that thick padding under your butt, that's mostly for the horse, not you. There's an old saying that you're not a real cowboy until you've bled through your jeans. And you're starting to believe it. Because there's no avoiding saddle sores. They show up on your thighs, your backside, and sometimes in the cursed no-man's land between. They start out as a little rawness, then they swell, then they pop, and then it's just you and your open wounds riding across miles of dust and regret. Quirky fact, some cowboys actually rode without saddles entirely. Bareback bronc riding was common among young, broke ranch hands who couldn't afford proper gear. They just threw a blanket on and held on for dear life. The pain from that, legendary. The bragging rights, even more so. But guess what? It didn't make you tougher. It just meant you bled more and probably limped longer. There's debate among historians about just how bad saddle sores really were. Some argue that cowboys were so used to riding, their bodies built up calluses and tough skin that helped reduce damage. Others claim that sores were a constant, miserable reality that every drover dealt with, regardless of experience. Some evidence comes from letters and journal entries, where cowboys openly complained about their raw backsides and the creative, sometimes disturbing ways they tried to cope. Think pine tar, lard, or even bits of chewed tobacco. You haven't tried any of those yet, but you're not ruling them out. Around mid-morning, the herd starts getting twitchy. A sudden rustle in the brush, a jackrabbit or maybe a hawk overhead, and the steers start shifting uneasily. You tighten your grip on the reins, eyes scanning for trouble, because when one cow spooks, it spreads like wildfire. And when 2,000 head of cattle decide to run, that's called a stampede. And if you're in the way, you're called flattened. You and the other riders shout and wave your hats, trying to keep them calm. Stupid snorts nervously beneath you, hooves shifting in place. You tighten your knees and lean forward, ready to bolt if the herd breaks. For a few tense moments, everything holds, just chewing and shuffling. Then one steer lets out a snort and bolts, and it begins. The thunder is deafening. The ground shakes like an earthquake. Cows charge forward in a wave of panicked momentum, and you whip your reins and dig in your heels, riding hard along the side to help steer the surge away from cliffs, holes, or your fellow riders. Dust clouds rise thick and choking. You can barely see 5 feet ahead. All you can do is trust stupid to stay upright and fast enough. For 20 solid minutes, it's chaos. And then, slowly, the stampede begins to slow. The cows, exhausted, fall into a slower run, then a stagger, then back into their usual aimless grazing. You're soaked in sweat and dust, heart pounding, hands shaking. One rider's missing a hat, another is bleeding from the cheek. But no one's dead, this time. You limp back toward the stragglers, groaning as your saddle reminds you who's in charge. Stupid is foaming at the mouth but looks smug, like he's been waiting for an excuse to go full gallop all day. You pat his neck, mostly out of guilt, and hope he doesn't throw you off tomorrow just for fun. You survived. You're bruised, chafed, and somehow even more sore than you were this morning. But you're alive, and in the Wild West, that counts as a win. The cows are still chewing like nothing happened. Just another burst of blind panic that could have flattened you into prairie paste, no big deal. You sit slumped in your saddle, hands aching from gripping the reins like your life depended on it. Because it literally did. Your legs are jelly, your mouth is drier than the Mojave in August, and your teeth feel gritty enough to file metal. Somewhere in the back of your mind you begin to seriously question why anyone chose this life, and then you remember. Most didn't. They were broke, or bored, or running from something. You, possibly all three. The day presses on. The cattle settle back into their slow, lumbering shuffle, heads low, tails swishing lazily, like they haven't just terrorised every living soul around them. You nudge Stupid forward, not because you want to, but because the trail boss is already glaring in your direction. He doesn't say much, just chews tobacco and judges everyone silently from atop his enormous gelding. His presence alone is enough to get the wheels turning again, and you can't blame him. If the cows stop moving, the money stops too, assuming you ever see any of it. Cattle herding might sound romantic, but let's be clear, it's not just riding and yelling "yeehaw." It's hours and hours of endless monotony punctuated by sheer chaos. You guide 2,000 longhorns, each with their own stubborn brain and a desire to walk directly into things, across terrain that could kill a camel. Dry riverbeds, rocky ravines, patches of cactus big enough to swallow your horse, and occasionally quicksand. Yep, quicksand, not just a cartoon thing. Longhorns are impressive creatures, big, lean, wire beasts bred for endurance and aggression. Their horns can stretch 6 feet tip to tip, and they will absolutely turn around and gore you if you get too close and too annoying. They're not particularly smart, but they are particularly good at finding ways to mess up your day. There's always one steer that insists on wandering off, leading a mini rebellion you'll spend hours fixing. You start to recognise the troublemakers by face. You even name them, not lovingly, more like curse words with legs. Historically, these cattle drives were massive undertakings. After the Civil War, Texas had millions of longhorns and no local buyers, while the North had hungry cities and no meat. The solution? Walk the beef to the nearest railroad, sometimes hundreds of miles away. The Chisholm Trail, for instance, ran from Texas to Kansas, and cowboys would spend weeks moving a herd up the line to places like Abilene or Dodge City, where the animals could be shipped east. It was grueling, exhausting, and often deadly, not just for the cattle, but for the men driving them. You guide the herd over a dry creek bed, carefully watching your footing. One wrong step and your horse could go down with a snapped leg, and out here, a lame horse is a death sentence. You've heard stories, quiet ones told around the fire, about cowboys who had to shoot their own horses after a fall. They never say it loudly, but everyone gets real quiet when someone mentions a bad crossing. Meanwhile, Stupid seems more interested in sniffing the dirt than staying upright. You give him a gentle kick and whisper some profanity that he seems to ignore completely. He's the only partner you've got on this trail, and he knows it. That smug twitch of his ears tells you all you need to know. You notice one of the younger hands, barely out of his teens, wrestling with a steer that's trying to climb an embankment. The kid's yelling, waving his arms, and generally doing everything wrong. You ride over, holler something a little less panicked, and the cow, startled more by your voice than his, reluctantly trudges back into line. The kid nods at you, sweat running down his face. He won't last more than 2 drives, you think. 3 if he's lucky or stupid. Probably both. And here's something quirky. Cowboys didn't spend all their time herding. When things calmed down, they sang. No, seriously. Cowboy songs weren't invented by Hollywood. They were real. Simple tunes, often repetitive and sung in low voices, helped keep the cattle calm. You catch yourself humming one now, a slow, wandering melody someone taught you your first week. You don't even know all the words, doesn't matter. The cows seem to like it. Or they're ignoring you, which might be the same thing. There's still debate among historians about just how chaotic these herds were. Some argue that once a routine was established, cattle drives became a well-oiled machine, with the herd mostly self-guiding. Others insist that it was a constant battle against the animal kingdom's most stubborn walking hamburgers. The truth probably lies in the middle. You've seen days where everything moves like clockwork, and days where it feels like you're chasing 1,000 toddlers with hooves. You ride on into the afternoon, occasionally shifting in your saddle to avoid triggering whatever nerve is currently sending lightning bolts into your back. The dust kicks up with every step, coating your clothes, your skin, your soul. Your eyes sting. Your nose is full of prairie powder. You blow it into your bandana, then instantly regret the smell. Eventually the sun starts dipping again. The herd slows, chewing lazily, bunching up in their usual clumps. You've made 20 miles today. Not bad, not great, just enough. You circle back toward camp, grateful for the break, even if it means another round of lukewarm beans, and trying not to cry while lying on your sore butt. Your thighs scream as you dismount, boots hitting the ground like anvils. You stretch, a few bones cracking loudly, and limp toward the fire. Cookie's already slopping something into tin bowls. Surprise, it's beans with a splash of mystery meat. You don't ask, you just eat. One spoonful at a time, chew, swallow, suffer. After dinner, you check on your gear, rub down stupid, and mumble a half-hearted apology for yelling at him earlier. He snorts. You both pretend that's the end of it. Then you head toward your bedroll, the stars already beginning to blink into place. You lie down, body bruised, mouth dry, dreams full of lowing cattle and itchy shirts. Another day behind you, another inch closer to whatever godforsaken rail town lies at the end of this trail. But tonight, you're too tired to care. The air is too still tonight. You know that feeling, the kind of quiet that doesn't soothe but sets your teeth on edge. The cattle are unusually restless, shifting and grumbling like they've caught wind of something off. You lie on your back, staring at the stars as they shimmer above, but sleep won't come, not with that kind of tension hanging in the night like a suspended breath. Every sound feels louder. Every crack of a twig or shuffle of hooves sends a little surge of dread into your chest. Then in the distance the sky flickers, just once. A sharp flash on the horizon, silent for now, but promising a whole lot of loud later. You sit up slowly, blanket sliding off your chest. Others are stirring too, muttering, stretching and reaching for their hats. One of the boys, Gabe, is already up and peering off into the black, trying to spot the storm. You meet his eyes in the firelight and give him a nod. He nods back, that silent cowboy language that basically means, "Yep, this sucks." There's a low rumble next, distant, but rolling over the earth like a wagon full of boulders. The cattle notice it. You can feel them shift as one, like a nervous school of fish, hooves scraping and tails twitching. Thunder and cattle don't mix well. In fact, it's one of the fastest ways to turn a peaceful night into a hoof-stomping nightmare. Stampedes are terrifying in daylight. At night, they're suicide with extra steps. You climb to your feet, boots crunching against dry grass, and jog stiffly towards Stupid, who's already snorting and pawing the ground like he knows what's coming. You fumble with the reins and toss the saddle on, muscles screaming with every move. No, it's a rush job, nothing cinched quite right, but there's no time for perfection. You throw yourself into the saddle and ride out toward the herd. The wind picks up fast, hot at first, then sharp, slicing through the camp and setting hats flying. You hold yours down with one hand and grab your bandana with the other, tying it over your mouth as dust kicks into the air. The herd is a shadowy mass in the dark, restless and agitated. You can hear them lowing, their voices blending into one uneasy moan. Another flash of lightning splits the sky, and this time the thunder follows hard and fast right on its heels, close. Then it happens. One steer bolts. Maybe it saw the flash. Maybe it just decided it had had enough of this cursed existence. Either way, it sprints forward, horns bobbing. Another follows, then another. And suddenly, thousands of pounds of raw beef are charging into the night, hooves thundering across the plain. "Here we go," you mutter, heels digging into Stupid's sides. He doesn't need much encouragement. He's already running, ears back, legs pounding the earth like he was built for this exact moment. You ride alongside the herd, trying to push them in a slow curve, anything to stop them from scattering in every direction. Other riders appear out of the dark, shouting, waving hats, doing whatever they can to redirect the flood. But it's chaos. Pure, screaming chaos. The dust is choking. You can barely see, just shapes and glints of horns. The ground shakes with every step. One wrong move, one misjudged turn, and you're roadkill under a stampede that doesn't even know you exist. Historically, stampedes were one of the most feared disasters on the trail. One loud noise, one unexpected scent, one crack of lightning, and the entire herd could lose its mind. Cowboys had sworn strategies, riding ahead and turning the herd into a circle like a giant angry carousel. If successful, the animals would eventually tire out. If not, they'd keep going until they ran into a canyon or river or, God forbid, a town. You remember the stories, the ones the older drovers tell, of herds running off cliffs, of men trampled so badly they were only identified by the buckle on their belt. You try not to think about that as you ride closer to the lead steer, yelling hoarsely and swinging your rope overhead. It's all instinct now. You're not thinking, you're just reacting. You finally manage to angle part of the herd into a slow arc. Another rider mirrors you on the opposite side. The circle begins to form, uneven, wild, but it's something. The animals start to tire. Their charge falters, slows, turns into a stumbling trot, then into heavy panting steps. Eventually they stop. The silence that follows is eerie. Not real silence. There are still hoofbeats and snorts, the whimper of wind, but it feels like a vacuum. The world's sucked empty after the storm. You sit in the saddle, heaving, heart racing, lungs burning. Stupid is soaked with sweat. So are you, but you're alive. The herd is intact, more or less. You glance around. A few riders are down, one's limping, clutching his side. But no one's dead. That's a win. Lightning still flashes in the distance, but the worst has passed. For now. And here's something odd. Cattle drives often did double duty as nighttime operations. To make up for lost time or avoid the worst heat, crews would sometimes drive the herd at night, using singing to keep them calm. Cowboy songs weren't just for show, they were literal tools to soothe 1,000 nervous cows too stupid to realise you were trying to help them. Songs like Git Along Little Doggies or Bury Me Not on the Lone Prairie echoed across the plains like lullabies for livestock. Scholars are still unsure how effective the singing really was. Some argue it was more for the cowboys themselves, to pass time, stay awake, or feel connected. Others claim it worked like a charm, calming both the animals and the men. Whatever the truth, you find yourself humming again as the herd starts to resettle, purely out of habit, or maybe fear. You ride back to camp in a fog, body aching, nerves shot. The wind has died down now, the stars peek out again. Everything's calm, but sleep will be a long time coming. You'll lie down eventually, sure, but every sound will make you flinch. Every groan of a cow, every whisper of the wind will carry the echo of thunder and stampedes. And when you do finally close your eyes, it'll be with your hat pulled low, your boots still on, and the faint hope that nothing bolts before dawn. You wake up with your hat still over your eyes and the taste of raw fear lingering at the back of your throat. The storm never hit camp directly, but your bones swear otherwise. Every muscle is locked, every joint sore, and your legs are too stiff to move without negotiation. You try to sit up and something in your back loudly objects, probably the vertebra you left somewhere back on mile 93. But there's no time for complaints. The cattle are moving again, the trail boss is already barking orders, and Cookie is rattling a spoon against a tin pot like an angry dinner bell that woke up confused. You drag yourself towards the fire, face crusted in dust and regret, and take your seat on the nearest log. Breakfast is, surprise, beans, but today they're slightly warmer and served with something that might be bacon if you squint hard and ignore the smell. You eat because there's no choice. No one talks much this morning. The storm rattled everyone. Even the loudmouths are quiet, chewing and staring into the flames like they have all seen a ghost, or worse, a vet bill. Your canteen's nearly empty, and that means today's other fun surprise is coming up fast, the hunt for water. Out here, hydration is a luxury. Creeks, streams and rivers exist, sure, but you don't always find them when you want to. Most of the time you rely on guesses, old trail knowledge and luck. Sometimes you get lucky and stumble across a spring. Other times you dig into a dry riverbed and pray for mud. Water's never just there. You work for it, you ration it, you argue about it, and when you find it, it's often warm, murky, and full of things that wiggle. You've long stopped caring. If it doesn't bite you on the way down, you call it clean. You pack up camp and mount up again, your canteen sloshing softly with whatever last drops you scrounged from last night. The sun's already rising, fast and angry, baking the plains with that dry heat that cracks your lips before you even know you're thirsty. Your shirt clings to your back, wet in some places, crusty in others. You're sweating, but it doesn't cool you. It just leaks out of you like you're made of brine, leaving salt stains on your sleeves and an aftertaste of survival. Stupid plods along, less enthusiastic than usual, which is saying something. Even he's starting to feel the lack of water. His ears twitch lazily. His tongue lolls from the side of his mouth. You reach forward and give him a pat, not out of affection exactly, but mutual misery. You're in this together. And frankly, you're both one bad mile from licking dew off a cactus. Historically, water, or the lack of it, was one of the greatest dangers on the trail. Cattle need gallons a day, and cowboys need a surprising amount themselves, especially when working long hours under a scorching sun. The average drive could cover areas with no rivers for dozens of miles, forcing the crew to carry barrels of water on the chuck wagon, or go hunting for half-dry holes called buffalo wallows. Shallow pits where bison used to bathe that sometimes held drinkable water. You've drunk from one, It tasted like desperation and hooves. What's quirky? Some cowboys carried water in canvas bags called desert water bags. These would be soaked and then hung from the saddle horn or side of the chuck wagon, allowing evaporation to keep the contents cool. Ingenious. Except they were prone to leaks, mould, and the occasional lizard sneaking in for a swim. One guy on your crew once found a scorpion floating in his, took one look, said, "Not today," and poured the whole thing out. And if you think cowboys had it rough, imagine the cattle. They'd grow weak, wander off looking for water, or worse, refuse to move. A 30-mile dry stretch could mean the difference between arriving at the stockyard with 90% of the herd or 60%. Dead cows don't sell. There's still debate among historians about how dire these water shortages really were. Some argue that most trails were carefully mapped to include regular watering holes and river crossings. Others believe that many drives were seat-of-your-pants operations, with cowboys relying on vague descriptions like, "Turn left at the big rock, go a day or two, then head uphill until it smells like frogs." Based on your current state of mouth desert, you're inclined to believe the second version. By mid-morning, the heat becomes absurd. The ground reflects it upward, frying your face from both sides. Your hat helps, but only a little. You've started imagining mirages. Cool ponds, icy creeks, even bathtubs filled with lemonade. You blink hard, trying to clear your head, and end up almost steering stupid into a prickly pear bush. He swerves with a grunt and shoots you a look. You mutter an apology and squint at the horizon, hoping for a shimmer that isn't a lie. And then somehow the trail boss calls out and points. Water. It's a stream, real, moving, not entirely brown. You hear it before you see it, that soft burble that instantly becomes the most beautiful sound on earth. The herd picks up speed, sensing relief, and within minutes the lead steers are plunging in, splashing, slurping, crowding each other like kids at a summer fair. You dismount, grab your canteen and stagger toward the water like a zombie in search of brains. You don't even bother filtering it. You dip the canteen, drink, refill, drink again. It's lukewarm and has a faint taste of algae, but it might as well be from the fountain of youth. You splash some on your face, it runs down your neck, and you nearly weep. Some of the crew strip off their shirts and dunk their heads in, laughing and shouting. It's the closest thing you've had to fun in days. You sit on a rock, drenched and half-conscious, watching the herd drink. The cows are calmer now, and for a moment, so are you. It's temporary, sure, but it's something. In the West, that's all you can really ask for. You top off your canteen and head back to Stupid, who's standing in the shallows, looking vaguely pleased with himself. You give him an extra long drink and a scratch behind the ears. You've both earned it. In another hour you'll be moving again. The sun won't get any cooler, your shirt won't get any less itchy, and there's no promise of another water stop tomorrow. But right now you've got a full canteen, a soaked hat and a horse that didn't kill you in the stampede. That's what passes for a good day. The water didn't last. It never does. An hour later, your canteen's already warm and half empty, your shirt's dry again in that sticky, crusty way, and the buzz of the sun on your skull has returned with renewed vengeance. You've rejoined the herd on the move, and as the hours stretch, the smell hits a new level of awful. You, the horse, the cattle, the other cowboys, everything smells like damp leather marinated in old meat and desperation. It's a stink so complete that you don't even notice it anymore. It's not around you, it is you. You drift toward the rear of the herd, flanking the slower steers while trying to avoid swallowing dust. Your scarf is wrapped around your nose, but it doesn't help. The dust's too fine and the grit too clever. It creeps into your mouth, coats your tongue, fills your ears. You'll cough up prairie for the next week. One hand wipes sweat from your brow while the other loosely holds the reins. Your whole body feels like a stretched tendon, tight, vibrating, and dangerously close to snapping. And then, just as you're considering flinging yourself off the saddle and crawling under a mesquite bush to die quietly, you remember that there's something worse than heat and thirst and sore bones. Snakes. This far south you've seen rattlers almost every day, curled up on rocks, slithering through brush, or worse, hiding under your saddle blanket. You don't always hear them before you see them, which is somehow more terrifying. Some of them are 6 feet long, thick as a man's wrist, with patterns that blend perfectly into the dirt. You once saw a guy get bit on the ankle because he stepped off his horse without checking the ground first. His leg turned purple by nightfall. By morning they'd buried him with a stick cross and a borrowed Bible verse. It's not just rattlesnakes either. There's coral snakes, copperheads, and whatever nightmare fuel crawls out from under rocks when you least expect it. Sleeping on the ground every night adds a fun layer of risk. You've gotten into the habit of shaking out your boots every morning, and once you dumped a scorpion onto your own foot. You screamed, fell backward into a cactus, and spent the rest of the day pulling needles out of your rear with a pocket knife while everyone pretended not to laugh. That's the joy of the trail. Endless opportunities for humiliation and venom. You pass a gnarled tree and spot a snake curled up in the shade, flicking its tongue in your direction. You keep your distance. Stupid doesn't need encouragement to panic. One hiss and he'll be halfway to Mexico. You tighten your grip and keep riding, eyes scanning every patch of brush like you're auditioning for the role of paranoid trailhand number 1. Historically, snakebites were a real threat in the West, especially during spring and summer months when snakes were most active. There were folk remedies, cutting the bite and sucking out the venom, packing it with mud, tying off the limb with a bandana, but none of them worked reliably. If the venom got into your bloodstream, that was it. You either made it through or you didn't. No anti-venom, no clinics, just whiskey and hope. Sometimes not even that. A fringe tactic used by some cowboys was sleeping elevated, laying their bedrolls across saddles or rocks to keep off the ground. Not because it was comfortable, spoiler it wasn't, but because it kept them a few precious inches away from night-crawling horrors. Others swore by tobacco juice rubbed on the skin, or burning sage around the bedroll to keep reptiles away. Did it work? Maybe. Maybe not. You're tempted to try all of it and wrap yourself in tinfoil for good measure. And here's where scholars disagree. Were snake bites a major killer, or just a rare but terrifying inconvenience? Some records suggest they were relatively uncommon, something most cowboys feared more than they actually experienced. Others argue that bites were underreported, especially among itinerant workers with no medical support. Either way, every cowboy had a story, even if it wasn't his story. You remember your own first night on the trail and how you barely slept, convinced something cold and slithery was going to end you before sunrise. That fear never really leaves. You learn to live with it, like background music. Even now, as the sun starts its descent and the temperature drops just enough to make you shiver, you scan the ground before you dismount. Every rock is a threat, every shadow a maybe. You step down carefully, eyes on your boots, and move toward camp with the slow, stiff gait of a man who's very tired and very aware of how fragile his lower limbs are. Camp's set up near a dry patch of brush that somehow manages to be both scratchy and flammable. You kick a clear spot for your bedroll, then pile your saddle nearby. Cookie's already ladling something into bowls. It smells like meat and despair. You eat without thinking, eyes still twitching toward every sudden rustle. Someone across the fire tells a story about a guy who got bit in the face while napping in the sun. You decide right then and there to never relax again. After dinner, you do your rounds. Water the horses, check the herd, tie your bedroll tight. You think about building a small wall of rocks around your sleeping spot, but your body vetoes that idea with a sharp jolt of knee pain. So you settle for shaking out your boots again and tucking them under your saddle. Then you lie back and stare up at the stars. The night sounds start up quickly. Coyotes in the distance, bugs in the brush, the occasional creak of leather as someone rolls over. You pull your hat low and try to sleep, but your body won't let you sink too deep. You stay half awake, half aware, ears tuned for that one distinct sound, the dry, unmistakable rattle that could change everything in the blink of an eye. And when it doesn't come, when the night finally slips past without incident, you let yourself drift off, just a little, still curled like you're expecting the worst. Because out here, sleep isn't really rest, it's just a gamble. You open your eyes slowly, expecting sunlight, maybe a warm breeze, or at least a fresh start. Instead, it's the same dust-caked reality, the kind that sticks to your teeth and makes your joints feel like rusted hinges. Someone's already clanging a pot near the fire, and that means Cookie's back at it, probably boiling up something questionable in a dented tin pot and pretending it's breakfast. You sit up, instantly regret it, and spend the next 30 seconds peeling yourself off your blanket like a leftover biscuit stuck to the pan. Sleep didn't help. If anything, it made you more aware of how exhausted you are. The kind of tired that settles deep into your bones and makes every movement feel like a punishment. You shuffle toward the fire, your boots scuffing the dry ground, and take a seat next to a man whose name you've never learned, but whose snores could have ended the Civil War early. He nods at you and hands over a steaming tin of what is probably coffee. You sip it, It tastes like mud and vengeance, but it's hot, and that's enough. The sky is pale grey this morning, no clouds, just a colourless dome that offers zero comfort. The herd is quiet, but that won't last. Soon they'll be stomping, snorting, and trying to wander into the next county, and you'll be right there behind them, wondering how many times you can scream at a cow before it actually listens. Spoiler, it never will. You finish your coffee and choke down a biscuit so dry it could absorb atmospheric moisture. Someone's already saddling the horses, and the trail boss is barking out the day's plan like it's going to make a difference. You mount up, groaning the whole way, and take your place near the rear flank where boredom goes to die. And that's the thing about cowboy life that nobody talks about. The boredom. Not just the I wish I had a book kind, but the bone-deep, soul-flattening kind. There are hours, whole days, when absolutely nothing happens. You ride, the cows walk, the sun burns. You hum the same tune for 3 hours and start wondering if you're slowly going insane. You talk to your horse, then start answering for him. You name rocks. You wonder if you're still a person or just a glorified cattle escort with excellent sunburn coverage. Some guys deal with it better than others. Walt the snorer whittles. He's been carving what might be a horse for 2 weeks, looks more like a potato, but no one has the heart to say so. Jesse recites Shakespeare, badly, and insists it keeps his brain sharp. You mostly try not to cry, or fall asleep in the saddle, or both. The trail is long and straight today, with no change in scenery for miles, just dust, cows, and the occasional vulture flying overhead like it knows something you don't. You spot one sitting on a fence post, watching the herd with that dead-eyed patience. You wave at it. It doesn't blink. You decide it's probably named Carl and that Carl is judging your life choices. Historically, cowboys spent up to 16 hours a day in the saddle during a drive, often in complete silence, or with only occasional conversation. Despite what the movies show, there were no dramatic monologues or spontaneous showdowns every few miles. Most of it was pure, dry, mind-numbing repetition. The mental grind was as real as the physical one. Men cracked under it. They'd get twitchy. Some would talk to trees. Others would fake injuries just to get a break at camp. What's quirky is how some cowboys coped. You'd think gambling or drinking, sure, and that happened. But on the trail far from towns and saloons, they got weird. Real weird. One guy on your crew, Otis, writes poetry. Bad poetry, mostly about cows and one mysterious woman named Marlene, but he's deadly serious about it. Another cowboy collects odd-shaped rocks and names them after famous generals. Then there's Charlie, who's convinced he's being stalked by a prairie ghost named Old Hank, and keeps a rabbit's foot tied to his boot as protection. You don't ask questions, you don't want to know the answers. Scholars have debated whether the boredom of trail life was exaggerated in later retellings. Some argue the cowboys kept busy with constant tasks, checking the herd, fixing gear, riding ahead to scout. Others insist the days stretched into an endless haze of nothing, and that cowboys developed their own rituals and distractions just to stay sane. Either way, you can feel your brain slowing down, as if it's trying to match the pace of the cows. By midday, you stop for a break. Cookie sets up a quick lunch. Cold beans, of course, and something greyish he claims is jerky. You chew without tasting and drink the last of your warm water. Then it's back on the horse, back into the slow, dusty march. The afternoon sun turns the land into a griddle. Heat waves rising in the distance like mirages. You've got sweat dripping from places you didn't know could sweat. You try to stay alert, but your head keeps nodding forward, jerking back as you catch yourself almost falling asleep. Jesse rides past and smacks the back of your hat. "Keep it together," he says with a grin. You offer a weak middle finger and carry on. Even the cows seem tired. Their pace slows. Their moves grow softer, more confused. One wanders off toward a tree and takes 5 others with it. You groan and follow, coaxing them back with curses and clicking sounds that feel increasingly pathetic. Eventually the sun starts to drop. The shadows stretch long, and the air cools just enough to remind you that night is coming. You set up camp near a dry arroyo, tuck your horse in for the night, and flop down beside your bedroll like a sack of laundry. You lie there, eyes open, staring up at the stars as they blink to life. Your body aches, your lips are cracked, and your brain feels like mush. But for now, the cows are still. The wind is quiet, and for one short, precious moment the boredom takes a break. You'd think the worst part of being a cowboy is the heat, or maybe the saddle sores, or perhaps the complete absence of indoor plumbing. But no, the real enemy is the trail boss. His name's Crag, probably short for crag face or crag skull, or maybe just a geological formation someone married. And he's got the personality of a hangover and the patience of a mosquito in a wind tunnel. Every time he speaks, it's either a barked order or a half insult, half command that makes you feel like both an idiot and a failure before you even know what you did wrong. Crag wakes up earlier than the sun and immediately starts yelling. He doesn't even need coffee to be furious. 1 minute you're still in your blanket, dreaming of water and slightly less disgusting food, and the next he's looming over you like a wrathful buzzard, snarling something about slackers, and getting your lazy hide in the saddle before the cows decide to unionize. This morning he's mad about the night herd rotation. Apparently someone overslept during their watch, and 3 cows wandered off. He doesn't know who it was, yet, but he's taking the opportunity to yell at everyone equally. You just stand there, half asleep, nodding, while chewing a dry biscuit that could break a tooth, until he storms off to berate Cookie for coffee that's too hot, too cold, too liquid. Who knows? Trail bosses like Crag weren't just fictional creations designed to ruin cowboy morale. Historically, they were the law, the boss, and the only reason the herd didn't end up scattered across 3 counties. They made the tough calls, picked the routes, set the pace, and kept everyone moving. Problem was, some took that authority straight to the head and stayed drunk on it for the entire drive. Others, like Crag, seemed to wake up angry and treat management like a competitive sport. Your job as one of the poor fools beneath him is to follow orders, shut your mouth, and somehow survive without snapping and tossing him into a cactus patch. Not that you haven't thought about it. Many times. Some of the guys have a running bet on who'll finally lose it and punch him. The pot's up to $17 and 1 rabbit's foot. You're tempted. The thing is, there's no HR department out here. No one's taking complaints. You either grit your teeth and deal with it, or you quit. And quitting means walking miles through hostile terrain with no food, no horse, and no guarantee that the next ranch won't have someone even worse in charge. So you endure, because cowboys are really just stubborn people with high pain tolerances and low standards for emotional wellness. What's quirky is that some trail bosses had rules they enforced with religious fervour. No swearing, no cards, no whistling near the herd. One boss even made his crew sing hymns at night, claiming it kept the devil away. Crag doesn't have weird rules, he just hates everyone equally and loudly, which in a way is its own kind of consistency. There's scholarly debate about the true nature of cowboy crews and the chain of command. Some historians argue that the relationship between cowboys and bosses was more collaborative than combative, more like a coach and team. Others say it was a strict military-style hierarchy, especially on big commercial drives, where profit margins left no room for democracy, based on the way Crag once threatened to nail someone's ears to a fence post. You're inclined to believe the second version. By mid-morning you're already exhausted, not from the ride, but from being emotionally pounded into gravel. Crag's had something to say about everything. Your posture, your hat, your horse, Stupid's walking like he stepped on a rake, and your saddle cinch, which you fixed twice already. At one point he mutters something about your generation being soft, which is wild because he looks barely 10 years older than you, just aggressively dehydrated and hate-filled. You find yourself drifting toward the back of the herd, partly to avoid more Crag sightings, and partly because dragging feels appropriate today. You hum quietly, something slow and tuneless, and try not to dwell on your current life choices. It helps, a little. The cows don't care if you're humming, they don't care about anything really. They're like living, breathing metaphors for apathy. And then Crag rides up beside you again, spitting tobacco juice about an inch from your boot. "You deaf or just dumb?" he barks. You blink. "What?" The cow, left side, she's limping. You squint. There are literally 1,000 cows in front of you. You're not sure if you're supposed to have memorized them by leg movement. But sure enough, one on the edge is walking like she got kicked in the shin by fate. You veer toward her, muttering under your breath. Crag snorts and rides off. Mission accomplished, apparently. You check the cow. Yep, she's limping. Could be a stone caught in her hoof. You ride close, swing down from your saddle and take a look. Sure enough, a rock the size of a plum is wedged in there. You wrestle it free and pat her side as she moves weakly and stumbles back into line. You climb back on your horse and sigh, just in time to see Crag nod once from a distance, like this was some test and you just barely passed. Lunch is eaten in silence today. No one wants to say anything that might trigger another Crag monologue about toughness or grit or real men chewing leather for snacks. You eat your beans and try not to fall asleep sitting up. Stupid's head is lowered, ears twitching at flies, eyes half-lidded. You envy him deeply. The ride continues. The land rolls on. The cows march like furry zombies. Crag yells some more, but it fades into background noise after a while. Just another part of the landscape, like rocks or scrub brush or existential despair. By the time camp is set up, your nerves are frayed. You untack Stupid, wipe him down and flop onto your blanket with a groan. The stars come out, but you don't bother watching them tonight. You just stare at the inside of your hat, wondering how someone can be so consistently unpleasant without exploding. Tomorrow Crag will yell again. He'll insult your horse, your boots, your very existence, and you'll nod, grit your teeth and survive. Because out here, you don't have to like the trail boss. You just have to outlive him. You stink, you know it, the horse knows it, the cows definitely know it. It's not just a mild body odour situation anymore. It's a full-blown sensory assault that could knock the buzzards out of the sky. You can smell yourself without even trying. And the worst part? You've gotten used to it. That faint rotten leather and salted meat aura that follows you around like a sad little cloud. That's just your new cologne. Eau de Trail Rot. A true cowboy fragrance by cowboys for cowboys and absolutely no one else. This morning starts like most do. Sticky, itchy, and deeply unpleasant. You wake up with sweat drying in cold patches under your shirt, dust crusted in the corners of your eyes, and your own musk turning your bedroll into a chemical weapon. Even your blanket recoils as you toss it off. You sit up, run a hand through your hair, which is matted with sweat and prairie grease, and realise you've achieved a kind of cowboy enlightenment. You are now more dirt than man. You stretch, crack your neck, and pull your boots on. They don't slip so much as squelch, like your socks have become sentient and are trying to escape. You can't even remember the last time you washed anything. Your clothes, your boots, yourself. Every article on your body has developed a unique texture and scent profile. Your shirt is stiff from salt and sun. Your pants feel like they've been boiled in cow breath. Your socks, if they're still technically socks, resemble damp bread. Bathing out here isn't a thing. There's no time, no tubs, no privacy, and definitely no soap. Maybe if you come across a stream deep enough and no one's around, you might strip down and dip in like a sad raccoon trying to rinse off its shame. But usually, hygiene is just a fantasy, a bedtime story you tell yourself as you fall asleep face first in the dust. Historically, cowboy cleanliness was laughable at best. These men could go weeks, even months, without so much as rinsing their hands. Bathing was seen as optional, a luxury reserved for towns with bathhouses, and even then most cowboys would rather spend their dollar on whiskey than a tub. It wasn't unusual for a cowboy to wash his face once every few days and call it good. They shared clothes, blankets, and diseases like it was a team sport, and boy, the diseases. Lice, fleas, ringworm, even trenchfoot if the trail got wet enough. Not to mention the ever-present danger of saddle rash turning into an infected mess, or cuts getting caked with filth and turning gangrenous before anyone noticed. You saw one guy last week pick a scab the size of a biscuit off his arm like it was nothing. He laughed about it. You haven't looked him in the eyes since. But what's quirky and borderline admirable is how nose-blind everyone becomes. Nobody complains, nobody gags. There's a kind of unspoken agreement. We all stink, and if we acknowledge it, the universe might punish us further. It's a funk for all, a communal wall of smell that acts as both a bonding agent and a natural predator deterrent. You don't need bear repellent when you smell like disappointment and boiled leather. Some cowboys had tricks, though. A few chewed mint leaves or pine needles to freshen their breath. Others rubbed vinegar or whiskey on their hands to kill germs, although that usually just resulted in them smelling like boozy salad dressing. A rare few carried cologne or hair tonic, dabbing it on like armour before heading into town. These guys were often mocked but secretly envied. You'd kill for a splash of rosewater right now, or even just the distant idea of shampoo. There's some scholarly debate over whether the stench was truly as bad as we imagine. Some argue that humans adapt to their environment and each other's smells over time, especially when bathing isn't a cultural norm. Others point to personal journals and letters from the period that mention the filth and stink with horrifying frequency. Soldiers, frontiersmen, and trailhands all had a kind of competition going. Who could be the dirtiest without dying? Cowboys were probably winning. By mid-morning, the heat returns with full vengeance. Your pores open up like desperate mouths, and sweat soaks through your shirt within minutes. It trickles down your back, your sides, even your knees. Yes, your knees are sweating now. You shift in the saddle, trying not to think about what's happening inside your boots. They're their own ecosystem at this point. You half expect mushrooms to start growing. The cows, of course, stink too. Herd of longhorns smells like a compost pile that someone stirred with a burnt tyre. Their breath is wet and sour. Their hides are coated in dust, dung, and whatever they rolled in last. You breathe through your mouth and instantly regret it. There's no escape, just layers of stink upon stink like an olfactory onion of sorrow. Lunch is worse. Cookie serves something that might once have been chili, now reduced to a greasy reddish mush that smells like regret and garlic. You eat it anyway, because starvation stinks more than anything else. As you chew, someone cracks a joke about needing to bathe in vinegar. Someone else suggests just setting the whole camp on fire and starting over. Everyone laughs, but the laugh is hollow. You're all dying slowly in a stew of your own making. After lunch, you get a brief break, 15 glorious minutes to lie down and do nothing. You stretch out in the shade of the chuck wagon and close your eyes. Then you feel it. An itch. Deep. Primal. You scratch your chest, then your back, now your arm. Suddenly your entire body is rebelling, screaming for soap. You scratch like a madman, muttering threats to your own skin. Someone sees you and nods. Yep, they say. It's the trail itch. Happens right before you lose your mind. You believe them. As the day winds down and camp is set, you sit near the fire with your shirt unbuttoned and your feet bare. Just enough air to feel human again. You consider walking down to the little stream you passed earlier. Maybe you'll strip down and wash your armpits with river pebbles. Maybe you'll dunk your head and scream. Maybe you'll just wade in until the bugs start biting. The possibilities are endless. But instead you sit there, scratching gently, letting the flames dance against your salt-crusted skin. Tomorrow you'll stink again. Worse, probably. And the day after that, and the next. It's not just a lifestyle, it's a scentscape, a signature blend of sweat, grime, livestock, and broken dreams. And for better or worse, it's the smell of a cowboy. It's dinner time again, which, as always, means more beans. You've reached a point where you can predict the exact flavour profile based on the colour and viscosity of the sludge in your tin plate. Tonight's batch is on the brownish-grey end of the spectrum, which usually indicates Cookie was low on anything resembling spice and used axle grease for texture. There's a tiny sliver of dried meat floating on top, possibly beef, possibly possum. You don't ask, you just shovel it in and hope the heat kills anything alive. Everyone eats slowly, leaning against saddles or rocks or whatever counts as furniture on the trail. Conversation is minimal, mostly because your mouths are busy and partially because no one wants to talk while swallowing something that might require a tetanus shot. Someone across the fire coughs violently into their bowl, then keeps eating like it's a normal Wednesday. You're too tired to be grossed out. Trail food isn't just monotonous, it's aggressive. Every meal feels like a new game of intestinal roulette. The beans are always undercooked or overcooked, or occasionally fermented. The hardtack is so tough you could use it as building material, and the jerky, when it's available, tastes like it was marinated in sadness and sun-dried on a cow skull. You remember one night early in the drive when Cookie served something he proudly called son of a gun stew. Didn't sit. And you bit into what turned out to be a hunk of organ meat with the consistency of a sponge. You swallowed out of politeness and shame, then didn't sleep for 2 days. The worst part is that your stomach has adjusted to this punishment. In town, your body would reject this food on principle. Out here, it just grumbles once in protest, then settles into silent acceptance. Occasionally you hear someone let out a slow, resigned fart. No one reacts. It's basically applause at this point. Historically, cowboy cuisine was a grim necessity. The chuck wagon, typically driven by a grizzled man like Cookie, carried staples like beans, flour, lard, salt pork, coffee, and sometimes dried fruit if someone got fancy. Fresh meat happened when an animal died or was shot and seasoning was optional. Vegetables, laughable. The entire 5-week drive you haven't seen so much as a carrot. If scurvy starts knocking, you'll just tip your hat and offer it some beans. Cowboys often cooked over open fires in the same pot using the same spoon for every meal. Hygiene wasn't a concept so much as a myth. Cookie uses a filthy rag to wipe out the pot between meals. He says it's seasoning. You suspect it's just permanent grease to his Still, Cookie is sacred. He controls your food, your coffee, and indirectly your will to live. You don't insult Cookie, you just eat and nod. Quirky fact, some chuck wagons had a sourdough pot that stayed alive for years. A bubbling, yeasty mass used for making biscuits or flapjacks. It was passed down like a family heirloom, and some cooks gave theirs names. Cookie's is named Martha. She's bubbling ominously in the back of the wagon right now. You think she's developing sentience. Scholars argue about how bad trail food really was. Some claim cowboys developed a kind of culinary creativity, making decent meals out of bad ingredients. Others insist it was a digestive horror show, with many drovers suffering from what they politely called trail belly. A charming mix of bloating, nausea, and explosive consequences. Based on your current digestive state, you're firmly in Camp Horror Show. Tonight you manage to choke down your food and rinse it with a cup of thick black coffee. It's like drinking hot molasses filtered through a shovel, but it cuts through the taste of whatever you just ate. Barely. You lean back and let the warm liquid settle into your gut like concrete. A moment later, a burp escapes, half gas, half existential sigh. Jessie gives you a thumbs up from across the fire. It's the only form of trail etiquette that still functions. You look around and notice the other men doing the same thing. Sitting in silence, chewing methodically, gazing into the fire like philosophers forced to eat wet cardboard. No one's angry. No one complains. The food is terrible, but it's food. It means you made it another day. In the West, that's what counts. Later, when your gut starts to gurgle, you'll stagger off behind a bush with a roll of bark you're pretending is toilet paper. You'll crouch in the dark, trying to maintain balance, while cursing whatever unholy ingredient Cookie tossed in today. The mosquitoes will bite you in places that shouldn't have names, and a toad might hop uncomfortably close to your boot. This will be the highlight of your evening. You've learned tricks, of course. Mix the beans with the hardtack to slow the digestion. Chew the jerky until it disintegrates or your jaw gives out, whichever comes first. Drink water after every bite to keep the mouth swamp manageable. And never ever ask what's in the stew. That's how you lose friends, and the will to finish your meal. Occasionally you daydream about food. Not the good kind, just different food. A fresh apple, a hunk of cheese, bread that doesn't shatter like glass. One guy said he once ate a whole tomato in a mining town outside El Paso. The way he described it, you'd think he'd kissed an angel. You'd trade your horse for one bite of fruit right now, maybe 2 bites. Stupid would understand. As the fire burns low and the night settles in, you scrape the last crust of bean film from your plate and wipe it clean with the last corner of a biscuit. You lick your fingers, not because you want to, but because it feels like the right thing to do. You rinse the plate with a splash of water, shake it dry and stuff it back into your saddlebag. Done! Your stomach churns, your mouth is dry, your entire digestive system is sending signals of mild rebellion. But you're fed. Fed enough to sleep, fed enough to ride again tomorrow, fed enough to face another day of chewing your way through the culinary underworld. The fire pops softly as you stretch out near your bedroll. Somewhere someone farts again. You smile faintly. You're part of a tradition now. A long, proud, flatulent lineage of men who ate whatever they could and somehow lived to tell the tale. Or at least to groan through another night. The wind's howling tonight. Not a peaceful breeze or a gentle rustle through the grass. No, this is the kind that makes your blanket flap like a flag and sprinkles dirt into every orifice with a level of precision that feels intentional. You've buried yourself in your bedroll, hat pulled low, trying to ignore the way each gust drives grit into your ears and nose and soul. Sleep isn't happening, at least not the good kind. You doze, you drift, but deep rest on the trail is about as likely as a fresh vegetable. And then someone starts snoring. Loud, wet, apocalyptic. You lift your head an inch and see Walt, curled on his side like a large grumpy house cat, rattling out a sound that suggests something might be living in his lungs. You drop your head back onto your saddle and sigh. You could try moving, but your bedroll is just now at the right temperature. Not warm, just not freezing. Plus your feet are numb, and relocating would mean dragging your aching body 10 feet away through thorny grass, cold rocks, and possibly a spider the size of a hat. This is just part of the cowboy's sleep experience. Uncomfortable, exposed, and full of ambient noise. There's always a snorer, always a cougher, and at least one guy who talks in his sleep. Gabe, for example, seems to relive his entire love life every third night. muttering apologies to Lena and arguing with someone named Big Jack in his dreams. Then there's Cookie, who sleeps next to the chuck wagon and occasionally jerks awake to yell, "It's burning!" before settling back down with a snort. No one finds it odd anymore, and if you're not being kept up by snoring, you're being serenaded by the local wildlife. Coyotes yip and howl in the distance, harmonising with the occasional moan from a restless steer. Crickets chirp, nightbirds screech, and if you're near a river, frogs add their own chaotic rhythm section. Once, you heard something scream in the dark, like a child, but clearly not human. No one investigated. That's the cowboy way. Hear something terrifying? Pull your hat lower and hope it's someone else's problem. Historically, cowboy camps were bare-bones affairs. Bedrolls on the ground, maybe a saddle for a pillow, sometimes a rock if your saddle had been claimed by someone quicker. No tents, no mosquito nets, no fire close enough to warm you unless you wanted to wake up with singed eyebrows, and crews circled their bedrolls around the fire, and others scattered based on space and personal preference, or the need to sleep as far from Walt as possible. What's quirky is that despite the dirt, the wind, and the wild noises, many cowboys came to find peace in the routine of it all. There was something calming in the sameness, the firelight, the stars overhead, the shuffling of cows, and the soft creak of leather as someone shifted in their sleep. It was predictable, in a life where very little was. You've even caught yourself enjoying it once or twice, when the wind dies down, when the fire crackles just right, when your blanket somehow smells less like death. Still, you can't ignore the discomfort. Your shoulders ache from riding, your hips from sleeping on rocks. You shift constantly, looking for a position that doesn't feel like slow torture. Side sleeping is out, your arm goes numb. Back sleeping? You'll choke on dust. Stomach sleeping? Hope you enjoy the feel of ants crawling into your shirt. You finally compromise by curling up like a sad crescent roll and hoping the wind doesn't pick up again. There's scholarly debate about how much rest cowboys actually got on the trail. Some say the exhaustion from the day's work meant they dropped into a dead sleep the moment their heads hit the saddle. Others argue that sleep was often fractured, with men taking turns on night guard duty and waking frequently to check the herd, their horses, or the ominous sound of something breathing near their bedroll. Based on tonight's performance, you're definitely in the fractured category. Just when you think you've finally drifted off, a loud moo cuts through the night, followed by the unmistakable clatter of hooves. You sit bolt upright, reaching for your boots and looking around. Stampede? Predators? Gabe's weird dream again? Nope, just one cow decided to take a midnight stroll through camp, knocking over someone's saddle and stepping directly on Cookie's coffee pot. You hear Cookie let out a string of curses so creative you consider writing them down. The cow wanders back to the herd as if nothing happened, and the rest of camp settles again, grumbling, shuffling, trying to go back to sleep. You lie back down, rubbing your temples, your bedrolls filled with new dirt, your elbows in a molehill. Walt's snoring louder now, maybe as a revenge mechanism. You've got a sharp rock under your left thigh that wasn't there an hour ago, and the fire's nearly out, casting only the faintest glow over the scene. It's cold now. Not life-threatening cold, just the kind that makes you curl up tighter, jaw clenched, shoulders hunched, blanket pulled over your nose. Despite it all, sleep finally sneaks up on you. Quick, uneven and fragile. You don't dream. You're too tired. Your body is too busy trying to stitch itself back together from another day of heat, dust and cow chasing. You just float for a while, somewhere between awake and gone, one ear tuned to the dark, one eye still blinking under your hat. And somehow that counts. You wake again just before dawn, bleary-eyed and stiff. The sky's starting to lighten, a cold blue spilling across the horizon. Someone's poking the fire back to life. The cows are beginning to stir. You rub your face, taste dust and reach for your boots. Another night down, another day ahead. And with any luck, no cows will step on your face before breakfast. You get maybe 3 minutes of peace before the storm shows up. It's not subtle. There's no gentle roll of clouds or poetic drizzle teasing the horizon. No, this is prairie justice. Loud, rude, and way too early in the morning. The sky flips from pale blue to gunmetal grey in what feels like 10 seconds, and you're barely on your feet when the first crack of thunder hits, loud enough to rattle the air out of your lungs. The cows, already twitchy, let out a low, unified groan like they can smell their own impending panic. You glance at the others. No one says it, but everyone's thinking the same thing. Not again. You scramble to throw on your gear, jamming your feet into damp socks and boots that somehow already feel like they have absorbed half the day's rain. Stupid's wide-eyed and fidgety. tossing his head like he knows what's coming. You saddle him with trembling fingers, trying to keep the leather dry, not because it matters, but because it gives your brain something to do besides panic. Cookie's shoving pots into the chuck wagon while shouting about getting struck by lightning. Walt's tugging his hat low and muttering prayers to gods no one's ever heard of. Then the rain hits. Not in drops, no. It arrives sideways, slapping your face like nature itself is insulted by your presence. You're instantly soaked, water running down your back, your shirt glued to your skin like a wet rag. The wind screams across the plains, lifting your hat straight off your head. You lunge and catch it, barely, and slap it back down while yelling obscenities that get swallowed by the gale. And of course, the cattle do what they always do in a storm: they lose their collective minds. One steer bolts, then two, and within moments the herd is in motion, heads down, tails up, hooves churning mud. It's not a stampede yet, but it's a wet, slippery mess of chaos and groaning beasts that could tip into full panic at any second. You and the other riders mount up and charge into the thick of it, shouting, whistling, waving arms, doing anything to slow them down. Your boots squish in the stirrups, your hat's half blinding you, and your horse is about as confident as a drunk chicken on roller skates. Historically, prairie thunderstorms were one of the Cowboys' worst enemies, not just because of the stampedes they triggered, but because of the sheer merciless fury of the weather. Lightning strikes could kill cattle. Sometimes it killed men. More than a few cowboys died sitting in the saddle, cooked from the inside out when lightning hit their gear. Metal spurs, wet saddles, iron rifle parts, all of it made you a walking target. And of course, there's nowhere to hide on the open plain. Trees are sparse, and when you do find one, you start wondering if it's better to take your chances with the lightning, or just lie face down in a puddle and accept your fate. Your hands are numb on the reins now, and your legs are covered in mud from the waist down. Stupid slips once, nearly topples, but recovers with a frantic snort. You shout, maybe at the cows, maybe at the sky, and you keep riding, looping wide to help herd the steers back into formation. You shout for Jesse and barely hear his response over the roar of the rain. Everyone is a blur, soaked, flailing silhouettes in the grey. And then, of course, you get stuck. One hoof sinks into mud so deep it grabs like a hungry mouth. Stupid, panics, jerks sideways, and you're suddenly airborne, landing face first in what can only be described as God's personal toilet, cold, wet, and full of things that wiggle. You lay there for a second, stunned, blinking water and cow snot out of your eyes, before dragging yourself upright with a squelch. Stupid's a few feet away, shaking mud from his mane like a smug golden retriever. You limp toward him, grab the reins, and climb back on with all the dignity of a drunk uncle at a wedding. Eventually the storm begins to move past. The rain slows to a drizzle, and the cows settle back into their sullen march. You're all soaked, bruised, and covered in so much mud you could be mistaken for a swamp monster. The fire at camp didn't survive. The coffee's gone, Cookie's muttering darkly while trying to light a new flame with fingers that look like prunes. What's quirky is how quickly everything resets. Within an hour, the herd's back in motion. The riders fall into the place like it never happened. You wring out your shirt, slap your hat against your thigh, and try to ignore the squish in your boots. Your saddle creaks with every movement, and your pants are plastered to your legs like a second, much colder skin. Welcome to the Cowboy sauna, now featuring lightning. There's a long-standing scholarly argument about how cowboys handled extreme weather. Some say they prepared, scouting for sheltered areas, building windbreaks, storing dry kindling. Others insist they just endured it, that the weather was so unpredictable and brutal that planning was mostly wishful thinking. Based on today, you're leaning toward the just suffer through it theory. You ride through the afternoon in a haze. Everything is damp. Your fingers are wrinkled. Your horse smells worse than usual. You're hungry, but Cookie's stew pot still hasn't recovered, and no one's in the mood for soggy beans. The whole herd slogs forward like they're considering unionising. Your jaw clenches every time a cloud rolls overhead. By sunset, the world looks deceptively peaceful. The clouds have mostly cleared. The wind has died down. The fire crackles again, stubborn and smoky. You eat cold jerky with a rock for a plate and call it dinner. The sky turns orange and pink, mocking you with its beauty like a slap wrapped in a poem. You peel off your soaked clothes, spread them out near the fire. and climb into your blanket with every muscle screaming. You smell like mud and horse and something vaguely fishy, but you're alive. No one got struck by lightning. The cows didn't stampede, the chuck wagon still exists, and your boots, while damp, didn't float away into legend. You lie back, eyes heavy, body aching, one ear still tuned to the sky. Because out here, there's always another storm coming. The storm might have passed, but the damage it left behind is clinging to everything like an unwanted guest who won't stop talking. The ground's a mess. Mud puddles the size of bathtubs, slick grass that turns every step into a comedy sketch, and saddle leather still soaked to the point where it squelches under your thighs. Your hat's bent at a weird angle from being blown off twice. Your boots smell like a fermented swamp. And your pants, well, you stopped caring about them 2 days ago. They're a walking science experiment now. And of course, because the universe has a twisted sense of humour, today's excitement doesn't come from weather. No, today you're getting a crash course in what it really means to face danger on the trail, the kind that doesn't care if you're tired, muddy, or emotionally ruined. It starts with a flicker of movement on the ridge, quick dark shapes darting in and out of the mesquite brush. At first you think it's more steers wandering too far, then you see the glint. Not cowhide, not hooves, rifles. The trail boss raises a hand, squinting into the distance. "Riders," he says flatly. You don't need to ask what kind. Bandits, rustlers, maybe even deserters turned highwaymen. People who see 1,000 head of cattle and a half-dozen exhausted cowboys and think, that looks like free beef. It happens more than you'd have think. A herd this size is worth a fortune once it hits the railhead. And out here, the law is about 100 miles away and doesn't ride particularly fast. The men tighten up. No shouting, no panic, just quiet, practiced movements. You check your revolver, making sure it's loaded, though you'd be hard-pressed to hit the broadside of a barn with your hands shaking like they are. The other riders spread out, trying to look casual but prepared. The goal isn't to fight. The goal is to look like you would if pushed. Outlaws don't like effort. They want easy scores. You're hoping to look expensive to kill. The figures on the ridge don't move for a while. Just watch, maybe counting you, maybe waiting for a better angle. Or maybe they're just teasing, letting you know that they're out there. A reminder that your life is always hanging by the thinnest of threads and that the only thing separating you from a shallow grave and a buzzard buffet is blind luck and a gun that doesn't jam. Historically, banditry in the Wild West wasn't all Jesse James and glamorous train heists. A lot of it was small-time cattle theft. Guys who rode in at night, cut out 10 head of cattle, and vanished into the hills. Sometimes they didn't even wait for nightfall. They'd bluff posture and shoot a few rounds over your heads, hoping the drovers would run. Some did. Others stood their ground and ended up buried with their boots still on. What's quirky is that some cowboys carried fakes, wooden pistols carved and painted to look real. Bluffed tools. Maybe they only had one bullet and didn't want to waste it, or maybe they were broke and too proud to admit it. You've got a real revolver, thankfully, though you're not entirely sure it won't explode in your hand if fired. It's been dropped, stepped on and rained on for a week. There's a scholarly debate about how often gunfights actually happened on the trail. Pop culture says it was constant. Every man a quick-draw artist, every town a shooting gallery. But the records suggest most cowboys went their entire careers without firing a shot at another person. Guns were tools, not toys, and most trouble was avoided by looking confident and not doing anything stupid. Which is what you're desperately trying to do now. Eventually the riders on the ridge turn and disappear, vanishing like smoke over the hill. No attack, no theft, just a warning. Or maybe a missed opportunity. Either way, you all exhale together, like a dozen lungs just decided to work again. Crag mutters something about keeping sharp and spits a mouthful of rage into the dirt. The cattle, of course, didn't notice any of this. They have been grazing, drooling and flatulating peacefully through the entire standoff. You give them a long look, half annoyed, half envious. Must be nice, being too dumb to realise how close you came to disaster. You ride flank again, eyes still scanning the ridges, every bush now looking suspicious. The adrenaline fades slowly, leaving behind a crash of exhaustion that settles into your bones. Your mouth is dry, your hands are trembling a little. You reach for your canteen and take a swig, barely noticing the warm metallic taste. At least it's wet. As the afternoon wears on, you hear the story evolve. It started as a few riders on the ridge. By lunchtime, Walt is saying they were 20 strong and heavily armed. By dinner, someone claims they saw a Gatling gun. You don't bother correcting anyone. Exaggeration is the lifeblood of trail storytelling. If you survive something, you earn the right to make it more interesting. Dinner is the usual bean-centric disappointment. You eat inhalants, still jumpy. Every snap of a twig has your hand twitching toward your belt. Cookie gives you a strange look but says nothing. You lie back after the meal, your body stiff, your brain buzzing. The sky is clear, the stars so bright they almost feel close enough to touch. But all you can think about is that brief flash of steel on the ridge. That moment when you weren't sure if your last words would be a curse or a prayer. You roll over, face buried in your blanket, trying to force sleep. It won't come easy tonight. There's no thunder, no snoring, no cows wandering through camp, just silence. And somehow that's worse. The quiet feels too big, like the land is holding its breath, waiting for the next bad thing. Because in the Wild West, it isn't if something's going to go wrong, it's when. You wake up with a dull ache behind your eyes and a taste in your mouth that suggests a mouse might have slept in there overnight. The first thing you do, before even sitting up, is slap your hand onto your boots to make sure they're still there and still uninhabited. You've been burned before. Last week you nearly stepped into a Scorpion hotel disguised as footwear. Ever since, you sleep with one boot under each arm like they're newborn twins you don't fully trust. As you drag yourself upright, your jaw cracks from clenching all night. You must have ground your teeth through some particularly spicy nightmares, probably involving bandits, stampedes, or Crag trying to replace the coffee pot with hot bean water. The fire's smouldering, Cookie's already mumbling obscenities at his utensils, and someone across the camp lets out a long, hacking cough that sounds like they're trying to eject a demon from their chest. You nod toward the sound. Another day begins. Today you're thinking about your teeth, not because they sparkle, they don't, but because your mouth feels like it's trying to disintegrate. You run your tongue across your molars and wince. One's loose, or maybe just angry. Either way, it hurts. You've had this dull, throbbing pain for days now, like a small, mean animal gnawing on your jawbone. The worst part, you can't do anything about it. Cowboy dentistry isn't really a thing. If you've got a toothache on the trail, congratulations. You're about to become a pioneer in pain management. There are no dentists, no numbing agents, no little paper cups to rinse and spit. There's just whiskey and pliers, or maybe a friend with a strong grip and a heart full of questionable intentions. Historically, dental hygiene on the frontier was practically non-existent. Cowboys didn't brush their teeth. Most didn't even own a toothbrush. They might rinse their mouths with whiskey, chew mint leaves if they were lucky, or pick at their gums with twigs. If a tooth went bad, the only solution was to yank it out, usually with whatever tool was on hand, sometimes a knife, sometimes fence wire, sometimes a rock and optimism. It wasn't dentistry so much as organised facial trauma. You reach on into your saddlebag and pull out a little rag-wrapped pouch. Inside is your prized possession, a handful of old baking soda and a toothbrush made from chewed willow bark. It looks like a sad mascara wand dipped in dirt, but it's something. You pour a little water into your palm, dip the brush, and scrub at your molars with all the enthusiasm of a man sanding a log with his face. It tastes like bitter trees. Your gums bleed. You rinse and spit, watching the pink foam vanish into the dust. Better than nothing. Probably. Jesse walks past and raises an eyebrow. Trying to stay pretty? You nod solemnly. I'm on a strict plan, sparkle by December. He snorts and keeps walking, his own teeth on full display. Half of them are stained. One's chipped. The rest look like they're plotting their own escape. That's the standard out here. Not so much a healthy smile as a partial surrender. Quirky fact. Some cowboys actually believed toothaches were caused by worms living in your gums. There were home remedies involving whiskey, hot coals, and a truly disturbing one that included chewing tobacco mixed with gunpowder. One guy on your last drive swore he cured his by biting down on a live frog. You're pretty sure he just enjoyed biting frogs. You've seen at least 2 men get teeth yanked mid-drive. One begged Cookie to pull it using a set of rusty tongs. Cookie obliged, then boiled the tongs and went straight back to making stew, possibly with the same pot. The patient screamed once, bled a lot, and then passed out with a rag stuffed in his mouth and a bottle of rot-gut whiskey in each hand. He lived. Sort of. His smile didn't. There's still debate among historians about how seriously cowboys took their dental health. Some evidence suggests they knew the risks and tried what they could, using baking soda, ash, or even salt to clean their mouths. Others argue most simply accepted tooth loss as part of the job, like saddle sores or being yelled at by men named Crag. Based on the current ache pulsing through your jaw, you're starting to accept it too. You ride flank again, jaw throbbing in rhythm with the horse's gait. Every bounce feels like a punch. You try chewing jerky at lunch and give up halfway through. The pain shoots down your neck and into your shoulder like a lightning strike made of regret. You quietly trade your jerky for someone's leftover beans, and even that feels like chewing glass. You don't talk much today. You're afraid your jaw might just give out. By afternoon, the sun is hot, the herd is grumpy, and you're fantasizing about soft foods, mashed potatoes, bread pudding, a banana. You'd commit minor crimes for a banana right now. You imagine eating soup that wasn't poured out of a boot. Maybe someday. For now, you keep riding, one hand on the reins, the other gently rubbing your cheek like it's going to apologise. The trail boss notices. "What's wrong with you now?" he growls. You think about answering, but all that comes out is a mumbled tooth. He just grunts. Pull it or shut up. That's Crag for "I hope you die quietly." As the day winds down, you dismount slowly, trying not to jostle your head. Your whole skull feels fragile, like it's made of sugar glass. You manage a few spoonfuls of stew and a sip of lukewarm coffee. Then you lie down with your head tilted at a weird angle, hoping gravity helps. You drift into sleep with your hands still pressed to your cheek, the stars blurring overhead, and a growing sense of dread about how much worse it's going to get before it gets better. And out here, it never gets better quickly. There's a moment just before dawn where the world turns ghostly, when the stars are still clinging to the sky, but the horizon's starting to glow, and everything feels like it's holding its breath. You wake up in that strange grey silence, blanket pulled up to your chin, breath fogging slightly in the air. The fire's burned down to red embers, the others are still asleep or pretending to be, and for a few precious seconds, you forget where you are. Then the ache in your jaw reminds you. You sit up slowly, massaging your face like you're trying to push the pain back in. It doesn't help. That molar is still in there, throbbing like a drumbeat from hell. You haven't eaten anything solid in over a day, and now even swallowing hurts. Your tongue brushes the sore spot on accident, and you actually wince. You look around, silently gauging who might have a bottle of whiskey left, or a pair of cleanish pliers. It's hard to believe this is still your life. You think back to where you started. You weren't born on the trail, nobody is. You came out here with a half-decent pair of boots, a vague idea about freedom, and a fantasy of wide skies and rugged independence. Maybe you had a girl back home. Maybe not. Maybe you left behind a family, or a farm, or just a bed that wasn't made out of rocks and cow farts. Now all of that feels imaginary, because the deeper truth that creeps in right around mile 200 of a cattle drive is that you don't have a home anymore. Not really. The West doesn't care who you were or where you came from. Once you're out here, once you've slept in the dirt and eaten the same pot of beans for 10 straight days, you're a ghost in your own story. You start to forget the colour of your own front door. You remember it used to creak. But did it creak when you were 7, or was that just a dream? Historically, most cowboys didn't own land. They weren't ranchers. They were hired hands, drifters, labourers, sometimes former soldiers or runaway sons or ex-cons looking for anonymity. The job didn't come with a house. You followed the herd from one rail town to the next, then moved on to the next job. A few stuck around long enough to buy a patch of scrubland, maybe build a cabin, but most never did. The trail became the only home they knew. You think of the last letter you wrote. 6 months ago, 8, you told your sister you were doing making money, seeing the world. You didn't mention the scorpion in your boot or the cow that kicked you in the thigh so hard it changed the way you walk. You didn't mention the loneliness. She wouldn't understand. She's got a real roof over her head. She has a parlour with rugs and curtains. The idea of sitting on a damp saddle for 16 hours would make her cry. What's quirky is how many cowboys just disappeared. There are stories, men who rode off and never returned. No death notice, no grave, just a name whispered once or twice before someone forgot it. Trail crews would move on without them. Towns would change hands and old faces would vanish. The West swallowed people like that. You could fall into a canyon or get swept away crossing a river, and no one would find your bones for years, if ever. There's a scholarly debate about whether cowboys formed real bonds or just temporary ones, bunkhouse friendships that lasted as long as the drive. Some historians say there was deep camaraderie, almost like a brotherhood. Others argue that most men kept to themselves, afraid to get too attached in a world where everyone might ride away tomorrow. You're not sure. You've got a few guys you trust with your horse, maybe even your life, but when the herd hits Abilene, they'll scatter like leaves in a windstorm. After a breakfast you can't chew, you mount up and ride in silence. Your stomach rumbles, but the thought of food makes your teeth clench in warning. The landscape today is more of the same: scrubland, dry creeks, and hills that go nowhere. You pass a broken fence post and wonder who built it. Probably someone with a dream, probably someone who gave up. Midway through the day, the trail boss mentions you'll reach a relay station by tomorrow. Just a shack with a water barrel and maybe a fresh packet of mail. You feel a twinge of something. Hope? Doubt? It's been so long since you heard from anyone that even bad news would feel like a warm breeze. As the sun climbs higher, the herd slows. A few cows break off and have to be rounded up. One collapses from exhaustion or heat stroke or the sheer injustice of existence. You watch Jesse and Gabe rope it and haul it upright again, like it's just another part of the routine, which, honestly, it is. Life is a series of things breaking, and you fix them until you can't. By evening, you're back in camp, chewing soft beans with one side of your mouth and sipping weak coffee like it's medicine. Around the fire, the boys tell stories about women they knew, or think they knew, or hope to meet in the next town. You stay quiet. The last girl you kissed wore perfume and carried a parasol. She would faint if she smelled your socks now. You stretch out on your bedroll and stare up at the sky. Stars blink overhead like someone's keeping track. You think of your name, your real one, not the nickname everyone here calls you. When was the last time you heard it spoken by someone who knew what your laugh sounded like? You close your eyes and hold on to that question, even as sleep pulls you down again. Because out here, no matter how many miles you ride, you're always just a little lost. You're not sure how long it's been since you saw a woman. Not a painted saloon girl from a distance or a farmer's wife yelling at chickens on the edge of a property line, but an actual conversation face to face with someone who wasn't wearing spurs or discussing the best way to deworm cattle. You'd say a few months, but time on the trail warps. It could have been a year. It could have been never. Romance as an idea gets real fuzzy out here. In the beginning, sure, you thought about it. Maybe you even carried a little locket with a faded photo tucked away in your saddlebags. Maybe there was a name you whispered into your blanket at night when the coyotes weren't howling too loud. But after weeks on the trail, soaked in sweat, wearing the same crusty shirt for the 23rd day straight, you stop picturing roses and candlelight. You start fantasizing about someone who doesn't recoil when you take your boots off. You wake this morning coated in your usual grime, mouth dry, eyes crusty. You're greeted by the comforting aroma of smoke, beans, and man sweat. Cookie's already ladling out what he insists is breakfast, probably beans with a hint of regret, and someone's playing a tune on a harmonica that sounds more like a dying raccoon than music. You chew slowly, staring into the fire, thinking about the last time you held a hand that wasn't covered in calluses or holding a branding iron. The thing is, cowboys were mostly young men, late teens to late 20s, and most of them were single. Not because they didn't want to settle down, but because there wasn't exactly a bustling dating scene on the open range. The ratio of men to women was comically lopsided. For every eligible woman in a western town, there were a dozen sweaty men who smelled like boiled beef and loneliness. It wasn't a competition, it was a siege, and when women did show up, forget it. They were married within days or claimed by some shopkeeper who already had a roof, a bathtub, and teeth. You, on the other hand, have saddle sores, a busted canteen, and a hat that smells like despair. You think back to Dodge City, the last place you passed through. You remember seeing a woman walking across the street with a basket of laundry. You remember how she laughed at something the butcher said. It wasn't flirty. She probably didn't even see you, but you thought about that laugh for days. It echoed in your head while you rode through cactus fields and dry gullies, and it kept you awake at night longer than thunder or stampede dreams ever could. What's quirky is how cowboys handled the drought of affection. Some wrote poetry, bad poetry, sure, but honest. Others carved names into their saddles or sang lullabies they barely remembered from childhood. A few got tattoos of initials they couldn't explain. And then there were the lonely letters, pages scrawled out to girls they hadn't seen in years, or maybe only met once. Letters that never got sent, or got sent and never answered. You've got one, folded and tucked into the bottom of your bedroll. You read it sometimes when you think no one's looking. There's scholarly debate about how emotionally open cowboys really were. The stereotype paints them as stoic, silent, all grit and no feeling. But diaries and letters found in old bunkhouses suggest otherwise. Heartfelt, tender writing full of longing and vulnerability. It turns out, when you spend days in the saddle with no one but cows and your own inner voice, your soul gets loud. Maybe too loud. So you write, you dream, and then you saddle up again. As the morning stretches, you and the crew ride out, the herd sluggish from the cool night air. You spot a few antelope in the distance and pretend for a second there's something else. Just shapes, just movement. You miss the sight of a dress blowing in the wind, a different kind of silhouette, something not shaped like a cow or a man with a knife scar across his jaw. Around midday, Jesse starts in with another tall tale about a lady rancher he met once down near El Paso. Hair like gold, eyes like fire, he says, waving his arms as if painting a masterpiece. Rode better than me and cursed like a riverboat captain. The others laugh, not because they believe him, but because it's the kind of story that warms you just enough to forget how long it's been since you even smelled perfume. You nod along, letting the fiction soak in. You hope she was real, even if she wasn't. Lunch is quiet, kind of stillness that comes from chewing the same thing again for the 100th time. You sit under a mesquite tree, staring at the clouds, and your mind drifts. You imagine walking down a wooden boardwalk beside a woman who isn't terrified you'll keel over from dysentery. You imagine holding hands. A meal that wasn't cooked in a dented tin pot. A clean bed. The sound of laughter that isn't just another cowboy mocking someone's hemorrhoids. But then the wind shifts, and the cows start mooing again, and the dream drifts off like dust on the breeze. By the time you reach the evening's camp, your thighs ache. Your lower back is staging a full rebellion, and your heart's still somewhere out there on that boardwalk. You unsaddle Stupid, rub him down, and sit by the fire with a cup of bitter coffee and thoughts that taste even worse. The others joke and laugh, but you stay quiet, eyes locked on the flames. The truth is, out here, love isn't just rare, it's practically myth. Most cowboys never married. Some never even kissed anyone outside a brothel. And even those who did settle down later often left the trail because they knew it's no place for keeping someone's heart safe, not when you can't even keep your own feet dry. You roll into your bedroll that night thinking not of cattle or rations or tomorrow's trail, but of the distant sound of a woman laughing on a porch you'll probably never see again. And somehow that hurts worse than any stampede ever could. The smell hits you before the sight, a mix of damp rot, bile, and something distinctly wrong. Like a stew that went bad 3 weeks ago and started having thoughts. You don't have time to brace yourself, you just round a bend in the trail and there it is. A cow, belly up, legs stiff, eyes glassy, and flies swirling in thick, lazy loops above the carcass. Judging by the bloat, it's been dead at least a day. You gag into your bandana and pull your hat lower, even though nothing short of a full diving suit could block this stench. The trail boss curses under his breath and spits in the dirt. Another one gone. This isn't the first cow you've lost, it's not even the first one this week. But each one hits a little different. You spend so much time guiding them, yelling at them, sometimes even naming the dumber ones, that you start thinking of them as part of the team. Not friends exactly, these aren't smart animals, but companions in misery. And now this one's lying in a ditch, ribs sticking out, eyes bulged, already halfway through the buffet line of decomposition. Gabe rides up beside you, pinches his nose and mutters, "Cholera? Maybe, maybe not. Could have been blue tongue, blackleg, or just drank from the wrong puddle. Could have gotten spooked and tumbled in the night, breaking its neck. You don't always get an answer out here. Nature isn't in the business of explanations. But the body's a problem. If you leave it too close to the trail, it attracts scavengers, buzzards, coyotes, and worse. Last season someone said a grizzly showed up after a cow died near the Little Arkansas. You don't believe it, but you also don't feel like testing the theory. You help the others haul the body further off the path with ropes and curses, then pile some brush over it as a half-hearted deterrent. It won't work, but it makes you feel like you tried. Diseases on the trail are just part of life. Well, part of death, really. The cows catch them from water, from each other, sometimes from ticks or mosquitoes. One cow gets sick and the rest get nervous. Then come the sniffles, the limp, the collapse. And out here, sick doesn't mean nurse it back to health. It means dig a shallow hole or find a big enough ditch. You've been lucky, personally. No fevers, no sores, no gut trouble, yet. But you've seen what happens when sickness shows up among the men. It moves fast. The worst part is you never know what you're dealing with, Could be just bad stew, could be cholera, could be something old and mean with a name lost to time, and once it's in your gut, there's not much you can do except hold on and hope you're not the one who gets the burial. Historically, trail crews lost cattle to disease all the time. In some drives they'd start with over 2,000 head and arrive with fewer than 1,600. The losses weren't always dramatic, just a slow trickle of weakness and death along the route. The same thing went for cowboys. Sickness wasn't rare. Dysentery, typhoid, cholera, and plain old exhaustion took their toll, and there was no real cure other than time, luck, and a strong constitution. You had to outlast it. What's quirky is that some crews believed in strange folk remedies to ward off illness. You've heard it all. Carrying a piece of raw potato in your boot, tying a red ribbon around your saddle horn, chewing tree bark or drinking water only after it sat in the sun for exactly 6 hours. One guy, Old Tom, swears by rabbit droppings boiled in whiskey. He says it's medicinal. You say it's disgusting. And there's still academic disagreement on how effective cowboy medical care really was. Some scholars argue that cowboys were surprisingly resourceful, using herbal poultices, clean bandages when they had them, even basic surgery in emergencies. Others point to the mortality rates and argue most sick cowboys just died quietly, wrapped in a blanket and buried under a lopsided cross. Either way, medical attention wasn't something you planned for. It was something you begged for when it was already too late. After the dead cow's handled, you ride on in silence. Everyone's a little quieter now. Seeing death, even if it's just a cow, reminds you how thin the line is between here and not here. You shift in your saddle, suddenly aware of every ache, every chill, every strange twinge in your gut. Is that gas, or something worse? You start ranking your symptoms in your head. As the sun climbs higher, the heat ramps up. That bloated smell clings to your shirt. It feels like it's in your nose behind your eyes. You sip water and it tastes slightly metallic, and you wonder if maybe the barrel's going bad or if you're imagining things. You glance at Jesse and he's pale. Probably just the light. Probably. Camp that night is a sombre affair. Cookie still makes beans, but no one jokes about it. Everyone's thinking the same thing. Please let this batch not kill us. You chew slowly, listening for stomach gurgles that sound like doom. So far, so good. After dinner, Crag calls everyone together and announces they're pushing hard tomorrow to reach the next river crossing. There's cleaner water there, maybe even a chance to wash up. A few guys perk up at the idea of scrubbing off the last 6 layers of skin and dirt. You just nod. Anything to get the dead smell off your clothes. You lie down early that night, arms behind your head, staring at the stars. The wind's soft. The fire crackles. Someone's whittling something nearby. Probably another terrible horse. You close your eyes and try not to think about the cow, about disease, about the fact that your stomach just made a noise it's never made before. Out here, there's no backup plan. No doctor coming with a bag and a stethoscope. Just you, your blanket, a bottle of whiskey if you're lucky, and the silent hope that your next cough isn't your last. You finally ask about the pay today. You've been thinking about it for weeks, months, really. But something about burying another dead cow and listening to your stomach gurgle in 3 separate languages has pushed it to the top of the mental pile. After another meal of beans that may or may not have included a mystery bone, and another night of sleeping on your spine like a broken wagon axle, you decide it's time. You ride up beside Crag around mid-morning casually, like it's no big deal, like you didn't spend 2 hours rehearsing it in your head. Any word on the money, you ask, real easy like someone inquiring about the weather. Crag doesn't look at you, just spits into the dirt and says, "When we get to Abilene." That's it. No details, no numbers, no acknowledgement that you've been on this hell drive for 6 weeks straight with only 2 shirts and a bedroll that smells like wet goat fur. You consider pressing him, but think better of it. He's gripping the saddle horn like it's about to confess to something, and you're pretty sure his eyes haven't blinked in 15 minutes. You fall back into place, annoyed and dusty. Again, the truth is, cowboy pay is a lot like the trail itself. Long, unpredictable, and full of cow pies. Everyone thinks cowboys made decent money. It's part of the myth, the lonesome drifter pulling in stacks of cash for his heroic labour. But the reality is more insulting than tragic. You might make $30 a month, if you're lucky. And if you don't die, and if your trail boss isn't skimming some off the top. So let's do some math. $30 a month. For riding 16 hours a day, eating actual poison disguised as stew, risking death by lightning, bandit, stampede, disease, or Crag's attitude. That's $1 a day. $1 single dollar. And that's before gear replacement, food in town, bar tabs, or whatever it costs to get your tooth pulled out of your skull without a mirror and a horseshoe nail. And you're not even guaranteed the full month. If the herd arrives short of cows, you might get docked. If there was damage to the stock, docked. If Crag decides your attitude was lazy, or your horse looked at him funny, docked again. You could ride for 6 weeks and walk away with enough for a drink, a shave, and maybe a room for one night. Then it's back to finding another drive. Historically, this was standard. Cowboys were disposable labour. The ranchers made the real money, selling cattle for huge profit once they hit the railheads. But the drovers, well, they were lucky if they got paid at all. A dishonest boss could vanish into the saloon and gamble it away before payday. And unless you wanted to sue, which was hilarious back then, you either took it or rode on. What's quirky is how some cowboys responded to this nonsense. They bartered instead of using cash. One guy might trade his last wages for a new saddle blanket, or a bottle of medicinal whiskey, or even a haircut and a hot bath at one of the nicer saloons. There were stories of cowboys who never touched actual money, just moved from one drive to the next, surviving on horse trades and bad credit with sympathetic barkeeps. There's a debate among historians about whether the average cowboy was truly underpaid, or whether they just squandered their earnings in town. One side argues they were victims of a brutal system designed to exploit desperate men. The other says they lived fast and wild, blowing their pay on liquor, cards and companionship the second they hit town. Based on your current financial situation, which is to say you have less than nothing, you're willing to bet it's a little of both. By mid-afternoon the sun is roasting again. Your sweat has dried into salty armour under your shirt, and your boots are starting to give you that familiar raw feeling at the heels. You chew on a stick of jerky that tastes like someone dragged it through an ashtray, and your stomach growls again, angry about being given something that technically qualifies as food but spiritually feels like punishment. You think about that $1 a day, how far it goes. In some towns, that's enough for a hot meal and a cot. In others, it's just one drink and a punch to the face if you ask for change. You remember your first drive when the pay came in the form of $10 silver clinking into your palm like treasure. You felt like a king, spent half of it in one night, trying to impress a girl named Maggie, who turned out to be married, to a man who owned 3 pistols and a mule named Kickback. That was the same night you lost a tooth in a bar fight and learned how to stitch your own eyebrow shut with thread from your saddlebag. You still have the scar, you don't have the money. By evening, the herd beds down near a dry riverbed, and camp goes through the usual motions. Fire, beans, cursing, and the collective sigh of a dozen men who know they're still broke. You lie near the flames, head resting on your saddle, staring up at the sky like it owes you something. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. A few feet away, Jesse's talking about plans for when they reach town. Gonna get a bath, a new hat, maybe a steak, he says. You want to ask him how, since he has been borrowing coffee from Cookie on credit for 2 weeks. But you don't say anything, you let him dream. You've got your own list, a shave, a hot bath, a meal that didn't involve a rusty pot, and maybe, if you really stretch it, a letter home. Just one. But deep down, you know you'll probably get paid, walk into town, sit at the bar and watch that money evaporate faster than spit in the desert. Because that's what cowboys do. They ride hard, eat worse, sleep in dirt and get paid in promises. And somehow you're still here. You know the stories. Everyone does. The cowboy, tall and lean, walking slow through the dusty street, spurs jingling, hand hovering just above his revolver, facing down some outlaw with a moustache and a name like Slade or Ringo or Butch something. There's a stare down, maybe a clever one-liner, and then bang, justice served in a single shot. Crowd cheers, saloon doors swing, the hero rides off into a sunset made of magic and moral clarity. That's the myth. The reality. You're about as close to a hero as a spilled drink in a dark alley. Your revolver's half rusted, your aim is mediocre at best, and the only dramatic showdown you've ever had involved arguing over the last biscuit with a man who hadn't slept in 2 days. You're not a gunfighter, you're a drover. You drive cows and hope not to die in the process, and you smell like old cheese. Real legends don't smell like old cheese. Today you're on lead duty, riding near the front of the herd. It's easier on the lungs, less dust, more wind. But it also means you're more visible. So when a rider appears in the distance, alone, motionless, you notice right away. He's parked on a rise, watching, not moving toward you, not signalling, just sitting there, black hat pulled low, hand resting on something at his hip. You squint against the sun and feel that familiar tension crawl up your spine. Crag notices too. He rides up next to you, chewing the inside of his cheek like it owes him money. "You know him?" he grunts. "Nope," you say. "Don't think I want to." You both watch a little longer. The stranger turns and rides off. No charge, no trouble. Just another shadow in a world full of them. But the unease sticks to you like dust on sweat. There's always the chance of a showdown on the trail. Not the clean kind, not the choreographed drama of stories. Just sudden, loud, and deadly. Historically, gunfights weren't nearly as common as the dime novels made them seem. Most cowboys avoided violence unless they had no choice. Gunplay meant blood, injury, maybe jail. And out here, getting shot was usually a slow, ugly death. No medics, no clean wounds, just infection, fever, and the real possibility of being buried by the same guy who shot you. Which, to be fair, was considered polite. Still, every town had its toughs, its wannabe legends, the man with a reputation, and there was always some fool eager to prove himself with a pistol. Sometimes it worked. Mostly it didn't. You once saw a guy try to draw too fast, caught the edge of his own holster, and shot himself in the leg. They called him One Leg Pete after that, though no one ever said it to his face. What's quirky is how seriously some cowboys took their gunfighter image, even though they rarely fired their weapons. They practiced quick draws in mirrors, spun their revolvers like circus performers, and polished their holsters like they were ceremonial armour. One guy carved tally marks into his grip. For what, no one ever asked. Maybe for cows roped, maybe for drinks bought, or maybe he just thought it looked cool. Scholars still argue about how much violence defined the cowboy experience. Some insist the West was lawless, a place where every disagreement was solved with bullets. Others say that the real violence was in the conditions, the dust, the disease, the sheer wear on a man's body. You're in the second camp, not because you're peaceful, just because you're tired. You ride on, fingers brushing your revolver now and then, not drawing it, just checking, making sure it's still there, still loaded. You haven't fired it in months, not since that time you took a potshot at a coyote stealing jerky. Missed by a mile. The coyote blinked at you and kept chewing. Around noon, the herd hits a bottleneck, rocky terrain that funnels them through a narrow pass. You dismount, walk your horse alongside them, boots crunching against dry gravel. One steer refuses to go, just stands there, staring at a rock like it owes him an apology. You swat at him with your hat and finally get him moving, but the delay puts everyone on edge. Confined spaces, slow movement. Bad combination if someone's planning anything shady. You think about that rider again, what he wanted, why he watched. Could have been nothing, could have been scouting, could have been the start of something worse. Outlaws don't always ride in with flags waving. Sometimes they wait until you're boxed in, until the herd's sluggish and the men are distracted. Then they strike. But the day ends without incident. The cattle shuffle through. The sky turns orange. Camp is made. Cookie hands out more of his soup, which tastes suspiciously like yesterday's stew watered down and warmed over with a pine branch. You don't care. You eat it. You drink your coffee. You lean back and try to let the fire burn away the tension. The boys start talking about famous gunmen, real ones, not the fake ones with shiny belt buckles and imaginations. Jesse mentions Wild Bill Hickok. Walt counters with John Wesley Hardin. Someone brings up Clay Allison, the man who supposedly killed a man just to see if he'd fall down like they do in the books. You listen quietly, hands wrapped around your cup, teeth aching faintly from the cold. You know your own name isn't going in any dime novel. You're not quick on the draw, you're not even sure your gun would fire if you needed it to. And honestly, that's fine. You're not out here to be a legend. You're out here to make it to the next town, get paid, and maybe find a bed that doesn't double as a gravel pit. As the fire dies down, someone pulls out a harmonica. The tune is slow, familiar, and off-key. It floats up into the dark sky, a melody built from fatigue and forgotten dreams. You lie back, hat pulled over your eyes, fingers resting lightly on the grip of your revolver, not because you expect a duel, but because you know this world doesn't care about legends. It only cares whether or not you're still breathing when the sun comes up. You'd think with all the time you've spent riding, your body would have adjusted by now, that your bones would have grown some extra padding or your spine would have evolved into a stack of springs. But no, you wake up this morning and everything hurts, everything. Necks kinked, backs seized, hips feel like you've been sleeping on a barrel of nails, which in fairness isn't too far from the truth. You stretch and something pops. It doesn't stop popping. Your joints sound like kindling before a fire, and frankly, you wouldn't mind bursting into flame at this point if it meant not riding for a day. You glance over at Jesse, who's trying to stand and groaning like someone's slowly stepping on his dreams. Gabe's already up, rotating his shoulder like he's about to throw a pitch but will probably throw his whole arm out instead. And Crag never groans. He just growls like a bear with a hangover and dares anyone to comment on his limp. Soreness is just a given out here. A constant presence, like the dust or the smell or Cookie's questionable hygiene. It lives in your muscles, your joints, your eyelids. There's no stretching it out, no bed to recover in, no hot bath with salts and candles. If something hurts, you ignore it. If it hurts worse, you ride with a lopsided lean and hope no one notices. The worst, though, are the saddle sores. If you've never experienced a saddle sore, imagine riding a wooden chair for 10 hours a day, bouncing over uneven ground while heat and sweat work together to turn your thighs into overcooked meat. Then imagine doing it again the next day, and the next. Now imagine never fully healing. That's your life. You learn to ride differently, shift your weight constantly, stand in the stirrups just to give your rear end a chance to breathe, though the air out here doesn't exactly scream refreshing. Historically, cowboys spent the vast majority of their day in the saddle. 10, 12, sometimes 15 hours depending on the terrain and the behaviour of the herd. And it wasn't like sitting on a couch either. Saddles were utilitarian, not ergonomic. If there was padding, it was thin, uneven, and likely soaked with years of other men's regrets. Even with a decent saddle blanket, the jostling could batter your bones into submission, not to mention the chafing. Oh, the chafing, quirky fact. Some cowboys wore ladies' silk underwear under their pants to cut down on friction. Not for fashion, not for rebellion, just because after a week of thigh torture you'll try anything. You're not quite there yet, but the next time you pass through a town with a dry goods store, you might just make some inquiries. Quietly. There's scholarly disagreement over how much physical damage the cowboy lifestyle really caused. Some say cowboys were lean and strong, able to endure grueling conditions without complaint. Others argue they were walking injuries, malnourished, constantly sore, and aging twice as fast as their city-dwelling peers. You're leaning toward the walking injury camp, mainly because you now make a noise every time you bend over. That didn't exist 2 months ago. Today's ride is a long one. The terrain's rougher. More rocks, more hills, more holes that your horse seems magnetically drawn to. Stupid stumbles at least 3 times, jarring your spine like someone ringing a bell inside your body. By noon, your knees feel like they're one jump away from becoming part of the stirrups permanently. Your hands, gripping the reins, are blistered under calluses. You can't even feel your left pinky anymore. It might be gone. You don't check. Lunch break offers no relief. You dismount, stretch slowly, and immediately regret it. You sit on the nearest log and realise it's even less comfortable than the saddle. You shift it around, trying to find a non-bruised portion of butt to put pressure on. There isn't one. You try to eat, but your jaw's still sore, your beans are gritty, and someone's harmonica has returned with a vengeance. You seriously consider throwing it into the fire. When you finally climb back into the saddle, it's like forcing yourself into a mould you weren't built for. Your legs don't want to bend that way anymore. Your feet argue with the stirrups. Your tailbone just gives up and starts sobbing quietly. You ride the rest of the afternoon in a sort of sideways slouch, which looks ridiculous, but hurts slightly less. So you accept the shame. By the time camp is made, you feel like you've aged 40 years. You unsaddle your horse slowly, like someone defusing a bomb, and lower yourself onto the ground with the grace of a falling cabinet. Everything cracks. You swear a rib just blinked out of existence. Jesse sits nearby, moaning into his hands. "What day is it?" he asks. And you both laugh, not because it's funny, but because no one actually knows. Cookie brings stew. You eat it without thinking. Chewing hurts, but you don't care. You just want calories so your body has enough energy to hold itself upright. Afterward, you rinse your mouth with coffee and stagger over to your bedroll, which feels like a sack of wet burlap filled with sticks. You lay down and immediately realise your shoulder's in a hole. You try to shift. Now your hip's in a different hole. You sigh, resign yourself to misery, and stay put. You stare at the stars and wonder if your spine will ever forgive you, or if your knees will stop feeling like someone's replaced them with gravel. Out here, the pain doesn't come in big moments. It's the slow drip of discomfort, the grinding of joints, the 1,000 tiny betrayals of your own body. And yet come morning you'll get up again. Swing your leg over that saddle. Chase cows, curse the sun, because that's what cowboys do. Even when it hurts so bad you dream of chairs with cushions. You hit the ranch just after sundown. Not a saloon in sight. No ladies waving handkerchiefs. No band playing a jaunty tune. Just a clapboard house, 3 sagging fences, and a couple of barns that look like a sneeze might collapse them. There's smoke curling out of the chimney, sure, but it smells more like boiled cabbage and wet dog than any welcome home. And you can already tell the chores never stop here. This isn't a place where cowboys rest. This is where they rot slowly, with pitchforks in their hands and sweat in their boots. You're here to drop off part of the herd, give the cows a few days to fatten up on decent pasture before they're pushed further north. But secretly you were hoping for a break. A few hours without your legs welded to a saddle, maybe some real food, a bath. Instead, you're immediately handed a shovel and pointed toward a manure pile the size of your regrets. So here's the cruel twist. Everyone thinks ranch life is the prize, the goal, the soft landing after the trails kicked your soul out through your boots. But that's a joke, a dirty, back-breaking, smelly joke. If the trail is a slow-motion stampede through misery, the ranch is just organised suffering. Every inch of this place is a task waiting to be done. Fences to mend, horses to feed, tools to clean, cows to doctor, chickens to chase, and always something to dig. You thought you were sore before? Try hauling buckets of slop across uneven ground while a rooster eyeballs you like he's about to start something. Or squatting to milk a cow that keeps flicking her tail directly into your eye. Or hoisting a bag of grain that weighs more than your personal will to live. The only difference between the trail and the ranch is that out here, when your back gives out, there's no horizon to chase, just a porch that's too far away and a bucket that still needs filling. Historically, ranches were less about rest and more about survival. A cowboy on a ranch worked sunup to sundown, just like on the trail, except instead of chasing cows across the plains, he was doing everything else. Branding, fixing windmills, cleaning stalls, birthing calves, slaughtering hogs, hauling wood, repairing roofs, and maybe, if he was lucky, eating a biscuit that didn't taste like sawdust and sorrow. Sundays weren't for God, Sundays were for fixing what broke on Saturday. And let's talk hygiene. On the trail you expected to be filthy. You planned for it. You could blame the wind, the dust, the stampedes. But on the ranch, that's where the judgment kicks in. The lady of the house, if there is one, gives you that side eye like she's debating whether to hose you off or light you on fire. The other ranch hands, all of whom have been stewing in their own filth for weeks, still manage to make you feel like you're the smelly one. You want a bath? Here's a tin tub with 6 inches of water, 2 used bars of soap, and a line of men waiting their turn. Congratulations, you just earned a splash and dash in other people's grime. Quirky fact, some ranchers had strict rules about cleanliness, but they didn't have the means to enforce them. One Arizona outfit was so desperate for hygiene they made cowboys rinse their socks in vinegar once a week to keep the bunkhouse from becoming a foot-scented death trap. It didn't work. The vinegar just added a sour note to the already horrifying air. And there's scholarly debate about whether ranch life was really any better than trail life. Some argue it offered stability, access to fresh food, and even a semblance of community. Others say it was just a different kind of prison, one with chores instead of dust and judgmental chickens instead of stampedes. After just a few hours here, you're inclined to agree with the second group. The only thing that's changed is the type of misery. You try to help out where you can, haul some hay, scrape some mud, chase a calf that's somehow figured out how to escape the corral 3 times in an hour. You get pecked by a goose, that's new. You don't know what you did to offend it, but the grudge is real. You limp back to the bunkhouse, bleeding slightly and covered in something that smells like fermented onion. The bunkhouse isn't better. It's smaller than your last camp, darker, and somehow even smellier. You pick a bunk at the end, one with a sagging mattress and a suspicious stain. The other hands barely nod at you. They've seen your type before, trail-weary, broke, and just passing through. You're not part of their world. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Dinner's served in a low-slung kitchen that looks like it was built by an angry child with access to wood and nails. It's stew again, thicker than usual, which you guess is an improvement, though you try not to think about what's making it thick. The cook's name is Martha. She has one eye, a wooden spoon, and the energy of someone who's already buried 3 husbands and would do it again. You sit quietly, eating your bowl of potential regret and wonder, again, why you ever thought this was the dream. Freedom, they said. Open skies, a man's life. And sure, there's sky, plenty of it. But freedom, not so much. Whether you're on the trail or stuck on a ranch, your days are owned by animals, mud, and tasks you didn't sign up for. You traded one cage for another. This one just has slightly more buildings. You step outside after dinner, watching the sun vanish behind a ridge of distant hills. There's beauty here, no doubt. But it's the kind that comes with a price tag. You breathe in, and it's manure-scented peace. You stretch, feel every muscle protest, and wonder how long you'll stay. One day, a week, till the next drive comes through and you're offered another chance to trade boredom for blisters. Out here, that's the rhythm. You keep moving, not because you're chasing something, but because standing still feels worse. You wake up in the bunkhouse with a mouth like cotton and a back like a busted wagon wheel. The mattress, if you can call it that, has collapsed in the middle, so your spine spent the night shaped like a question mark. You roll over, trying to ignore the snoring echo chamber of half a dozen men who sleep like bears in the middle of hibernation. One of them, maybe Jesse, has a cough that sounds like it's trying to escape his lungs with a crowbar. You sit up, rub your face, and try to remember what day it is. It doesn't come. All you know is that it starts like all the others. Feet on the cold floor, boots that never quite dry out, and the familiar soul-wilting smell of mildew and livestock. A rooster crows outside, possibly the same one that tried to fight you yesterday. And somewhere in the distance, a cow lets out a noise so pitiful you'd think it just read your diary. You shuffle outside, blinking into the pale morning light, and guess what? It's branding day. You weren't told. Nobody warns the drifters. You're just handed a branding iron and a pair of gloves that might have been new sometime during the Civil War. Craig's already out by the corral shouting instructions like a man whose throat is powered by gravel and vinegar. He waves at you without looking, points to the chute, and gets back to yelling at Gabe, who apparently tied the wrong knot on the squeeze gate and nearly took off his own foot. Branding is a process, a smoky, screamy, smelly process. Calves are roped, dragged, pinned, and then marked with an iron so hot it glows like a miniature sun. The smell of singed hair and skin hits you hard, sharp, meaty, unmistakable. The calf kicks, screams, thrashes, and then it's done. Move along. Next. You grab your side of the calf, front legs always, and dig your boots into the dirt. The little beast's stronger than it looks, and even though it's just a few months old, it nearly jerks your arms clean out of their sockets. Your gloves don't help. They're more holes than leather at this point. You hold it down while the iron comes down hissing, and you feel the vibrations through the calf's body as it spasms. You try not to think about it. Try not to breathe. Try not to imagine it happening to you. Historically, branding was essential for cattle ownership. Out on the open range, where herds mingled freely and rustlers were a constant threat, a ranch's brand was its signature, its proof of ownership, its declaration of, "This cow is mine and I will fight you for it." Every ranch had its own design, some simple, some complex, some downright artistic. But to a cowboy, branding meant hard labour, risk of injury, and a full day of wrestling angry, terrified livestock under the hot sun. You do it again and again and again. Each time your hands ache a little more. Your back tightens. The smell clings to your clothes, your hair, your paws. At lunch, you try to eat with shaking fingers and can't stop hearing the cries. You're not soft, you've done worse. But there's something about this, about holding something down and burning it, that gets under your skin no matter how many times you do it. What's quirky is how cowboys personalised their branding days. Some had lucky gloves or hats they only wore during branding. Others swore by certain songs, humming them through clenched teeth like talismans. One guy you met on a previous drive whistled Camptown Races while he worked. Said it calmed him and the calves. It didn't, but he believed it, and that was enough. There's still scholarly debate about the emotional toll branding took on cowboys. Some records suggest they viewed it purely as labour, just another chore. Others hint at deeper discomfort, especially among younger hands seeing it for the first time. A few even wrote about nightmares, about the sound of the iron, about the looks in the calves' eyes. You're not about to write a diary entry, but you understand. You're going to smell that burn in your nose long after you leave this place. The afternoon drags on. You swap out gloves with Jesse, who's bleeding from a busted knuckle and trying not to pass out. Someone gets kicked in the shin and limps off. cursing in creative and unexpected ways. The iron has to be reheated constantly, which means standing near a roaring fire while you're already sweating through every layer you own. By hour 6, your arms have lost all feeling. By hour 7, your shirt is soaked through and caked with dust, blood, and regret. But the work gets done. Eventually. The last calf is dragged out of the chute, marked, and released. The crew collapses on the fence rails, breathing heavy, looking like a line of very sad scarecrows. Crag grunts in approval, and that's about the closest thing to praise you'll get. Cookie starts hauling stew pots out from the bunkhouse, and nobody has the strength to complain this time. Not even Walt, who once threw a spoon into the fire because he found a hair in his beans. You eat without tasting, just swallowing, refueling, one eye on the sky, which is bleeding into orange and purple. Somewhere out in the darkening pasture, you hear the cows settling down or possibly plotting revenge. You lean back against the fence post and stare at your hands. They're red, blistered, shaking. You try to open and close your fingers a few times. They don't quite respond. You sleep hard that night. Not well, just hard. Like a rock rolling downhill. Your body collapses before your mind can even start sorting through the images of the day. But sometime near midnight, you wake suddenly, heart pounding, unsure why. You lie there in the dark, sweat slick on your neck, and you hear it again, the hiss of iron, the sound of a calf crying out. It fades eventually. It always does. But it never really leaves. You're riding again. Of course you are, because that's the rhythm now. Ride, rest, regret, repeat. The ranch work wore out your back, your hands, your soul, and now the trails come back for what's left. You're not sure why you signed on for another leg of the drive. Maybe you were too tired to say no. Maybe it's just what you do now. When a cowboy has nowhere to be, he keeps moving, hoping the next ridge will offer something better. It rarely does, but hope's a stubborn thing. This time you're heading east. The crew's smaller. Walt caught a fever 2 days after branding and hasn't gotten up since. Craig left him behind at the ranch with enough water, stew, and an order not to die until they came back for him. No one's holding their breath. Jesse's quiet too. He hasn't told a single ridiculous story in 3 days, which is how you know something's wrong. His laugh is gone, and with it, a little of the road's colour. You ride flank again. It's like being in the middle of a dream you've had before. Cattle snorting, dust choking your nose, the saddle creaking with every sway. Your thighs are numb. Your ribs feel like they're wrapped in rope. The sky's wide open, the land dry as ash. You've seen this view 100 times, but now it feels heavy, like it knows how tired you are and doesn't care. And that's the thing, the land doesn't care. It doesn't care how many cows you've wrangled, how many blisters you've lanced, how many men you've bagged. It doesn't remember your name or your horse's name, or that one time you saved a steer from drowning in the Cimarron. The prairie stretches on like an old preacher mid-sermon, full of stories, none of them about you. You cross a creek that barely exists anymore, just a trickle really. A cow slips on the bank and you and Gabe spend 15 sweaty minutes dragging it out with ropes and curses. It limps off with a snort, no gratitude whatsoever. Your boots are soaked, your gloves are mud, and your temper is hanging on by a frayed thread. Historically, the last leg of a cattle drive was often the most miserable. Everyone's sore, the novelty's worn off, tempers are short, and both man and beast are exhausted. There's no glory left, just the crawl toward the finish line, where the only prize is maybe getting paid and maybe not dying. The trail doesn't end with trumpets. It ends with sore feet and someone coughing blood behind the chuck wagon. You think of all the cowboys who didn't make it, the ones who got kicked in the head or thrown from a horse or caught dysentery from a bad water barrel. Men who left no letters behind, whose names blew away with the dust. You're not famous, you're not even interesting, but you're still here, and out here that counts for something. Quirky fact, some cowboys believed in trail omens, buzzards flying too low, snakes curled into the road, coyotes howling before sunset. Bad signs, markers of things going sideways. Yesterday you saw a crow land on the cookpot. Jesse turned pale. He wouldn't eat dinner. You did, regretted it around midnight. Maybe Jesse was right. There's still debate among historians about how mentally worn down cowboys became during these long drives. Some argue they developed deep bonds and internal strength. Others claim most simply became hollow, functioning bodies with the emotional range of a rock. You're starting to lean toward the second idea. When Gabe tells you his saddle's giving him boils, you nod and grunt. That's all you've got. Sympathy costs energy. By nightfall, camp is set in a rocky hollow with barely enough space for the herd. The firewood is scarce, the water brackish. Cookie makes a pot of something that smells edible if you hold your nose. You sit with your knees pulled up, spooning food into your mouth without looking at it. The stars come out, but you're too tired to care. You used to marvel at them, those endless, sparkling dots. Now they just remind you of how far everything else is. Jessie finally speaks, quiet. Think Walt's dead yet? You pause, swallow. Hope not. That stew won't keep long. Neither will he. And just like that, the conversation's over, because there's nothing else to say. You roll into your bedroll, aching in too many places to count. Your hat slips over your eyes. The fire crackles. Someone coughs. Somewhere in the herd, a cow moos like it's telling a bad joke no one wants to hear. You close your eyes and try to sleep. You dream of nothing, not even silence. You don't know what town you're riding toward. You don't care. Whatever's there, money, a bath, maybe a letter from someone who still remembers you, it won't change what you are. A man who rides, a man who aches, a man who spends every day dancing one step ahead of death with a mouthful of trail dust and a pocket full of maybe. When you started, you thought being a cowboy meant freedom, adventure, glory, but now you know the truth. It just means you're too stubborn to quit. You made it, not to safety, not to comfort, not even to a particularly welcoming town, but to the end of the trail. The herd's been delivered. The railhead smells like iron, sweat and manure. The ground's a mix of rutted mud and shattered dreams, and the sky's as flat and indifferent as ever. You've been paid, or most of it. Crag handed you a few coins with a grunt and a look that said, "Don't expect more." And honestly, you didn't. You shoved the money into your pocket without counting it. You already know it won't last. The others scatter. Some head straight to the saloon. Others find the bathhouse, the gambling hall, or that corner of town where names are exchanged only if someone forgets to duck. You just stand there for a while, unsure what to do with your hands now that they're not gripping reins or lifting buckets or choking down coffee made from actual dirt. The sun sets behind the rail cars, painting everything in rust and shadow. You take a breath. It's shallow. You're still sore, still filthy, still hungry, but you're here. And the truth is, there's not much else waiting for you. You're not going back to a big ranch with a porch and a rocking chair. You don't have a sweetheart keeping the fire warm. You've got a few silver coins, a horse that tolerates you, and maybe a few more miles left in your legs. So you find a bench, sit down with a groan that belongs in a funeral hymn, and let the night rise up around you. This wasn't the dream. This was the dust and blood-stained reality behind the dream. You weren't the hero. You weren't the outlaw. You weren't the legend. But you were the cowboy. And that means something. It means you endured. It means you rode on even when it sucked. It means you survived. So get some rest, partner. You earned it.